Thank you so much. Once again, I welcome you all for this technical session and the third day of our International Conference of Law and Economics. We feel very proud to be part of this international conference. So this is the technical session 12 on the theme of regulation and business law. And the chairperson for this technical session is Professor Dr. Mamatha Biswal, Dean of Faculty and Academic Affairs, and Professor of Law and ICSSR Senior Research Fellow, JNLU. And the co-chair for this session is Dr. Hitesh Thakkar, Assistant Professor of Economics, JNLU. I'll just very briefly introduce our chair and co-chair for the audience here. Professor Dr. Mamatha Biswal is working as a professor of law at Gujarat National Law University. Her areas of expertise are corporate laws, international trade law, international sales law, insolvency and bankruptcy law. She is the Center Director of the Center of Corporate and Insolvency Laws. She was awarded the prestigious ICSSR Senior Fellowship Award in 2016 and 17 in the topic Legal Challenges Before India to Ratify the United Nations Conventions on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods, a critical analysis. She has been inducted as an independent women director in the Gujarat-based PSUs, that is GSPC Pipavav Power Company Limited, Gujarat State Energy Generation Limited, and GPSC LNG Limited. She is a member of the high-level committee constituted by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Government of India, for preparation of investigation manual for serious fraud investigation office. Dr. Biswal has published articles on emerging areas of law, specifically corporate laws, corporate social responsibility, insolvency and bankruptcy laws, etc., in various journals and book chapters. Dr. Biswal has participated and presented various research papers on contemporary themes of law in international national conferences, seminars, and symposiums. She has been invited as a panelist in conferences, seminars, etc. as well. She has been a resource person in various training programs in state and national level, that is Indian Corporate Law Service Probationary Officers 5th batch of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Indian Business and Commercial Law Academy, All Women Police Officers Seminar on gender realities and understanding laws related to women. She was also invited as a guest speaker in the sensitization program organized by the DLSA in the Regional Academy of Broadcasting and Multimedia, AR and Doordarshan. She was also a speaker on Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India Awareness Program and many others to her credit. I welcome you, ma'am, for this technical session. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the co-chair for today's this particular technical session is Dr. Hitesh Kumar Thakkar, who is an assistant professor of economics at JNLU. He has over 10 years of teaching experience for the undergraduate program and over 4 years of teaching experience for the PG program. His areas of general interest is global financial regulatory system, global financial crisis and global financial integration, macroeconomics and money, banking, and public finance, and of course, law and economics. He has also received honors and awards like German Academic Exchange Service Scholarship for the Study and Research Exchange, University of Cologne, Germany, from 31st March 2014 to 28 June 2014. And Dainik Bhaskar National Education Leadership Awards 2013 for Best Teacher in Economics on 23rd October 2013. He has also addressed many lectures, and he has also delivered many lectures, and he has also been a visiting faculty. He was a plenary speaker and delivered the session on withdrawal of cases under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, Law and Economics Approach in the second GNLU workshop on research in law and economics under the aegis of GNLU Center for Law and Economics. His credit goes on just just because shortage of time, just cutting it out here. He has also published many books and chapters in journals. He is also an enthusiastic researcher in the field of law and economics. Thank you so much for coming here, sir, for the technical session. I now, without any delay, I very quickly tell the rules and regulations for the participants here for this technical session. So each paper presenters will be given 30 minutes for their presentation, including the question and answer session, 20 minutes for presentation and 10 minutes for the question and answer session. You may use PPT if you want, and you can leave the session only at the end of the session, and you can rejoin for the next session sharply 10 minutes before the session starts. And the participants are requested not to share their screen or window except during their presentations. The interactions, question and answer sessions will be in the last 10 minutes of each presentation. The participant can leave the call only at the end of each session. Please be informed that all the sessions will be recorded and monitored for attendance purpose. Um, and be punctual for all sessions. Please keep an eye on the chat box where our student volunteer will be warning you about the time. And please keep your camera turned on and mic turned off at all times during the session. In case if there is any technical glitches, maybe you can turn off your camera. Thank you so much. And Ms. Yashoda will be the student volunteer for this session, and she will be reminding the participants, I mean the presenters, on about their time. Thank you so much. Over to the chair and the co-chair.
Thank you, madam. So, should we start now?
Yes, doctor.
Okay. So, good afternoon to all of you. Respected Vice Chancellor, Professor Elizabeth Ma'am, in her absence here. The convener, co-convener, organizing committee member, Dr. Thomas, who is I think, convener of this program, and the co-chair, Dr. Hitesh, the presenters, participants, the student members of this conference. So I welcome all of you to this International Conference on Law and Economics 2021, which is organized by Tamil Nadu National Law University in association with Indian Association of Law and Economics. And this this is technical session 11 and I think 12 and 13th, which is clubbed together. And the theme of the session is regulation and business law. So here today we have 6 presentations and on various areas of the business law. Each presenter will present, but regarding the theme, and I congratulate the organizing team and also the advisory board members for designing this conference in such a wonderful way and covering all the emerging laws, giving the economic approach. And in this particular session, when we talk about business law and regulations, it has a very long history in our country because when you look at the history 50 years back business law, then you will just see the only the central legislation or some amendment with the state where it is permitted. Those laws were there, and very limited number of law. And if you see this development of the regulation, so the post 1991 and pre 1991, there is a very big difference in the regulatory approach to business law. And why I report this particular point, because we all know that 1991 budget was one of the very famous budget for liberalization of economy of the country. I'm so sorry. And with that, the trade liberalization took place, and slowly, various legislations were enacted. Just for example, this Xiii Act, which is one of the very important legislation in business law area, and we didn't have such a regulator. But due to all these, and the background is Harshad Mehta scam that which has shaken the entire country and capital market. Then the SEBI Act came with a very strong regulatory framework. Then when we look at the regulatory activities and responsibilities of SEBI, we'll see that number of regulations regulating the various business activities of the corporate sectors and to protect the investors' interest. So in various area of the listed company, and when investor protection is concerned, even in certain areas, the unlisted companies are also covered, like in SEBI Sahara. Even the Sahara, both the companies were unlisted, but those two companies were responsible for that fraudulent transaction, the share allotment through private placement, which was not a private placement, it was a public issue. So with that, the slowly, the regulatory approach was started in India. Then you see the FEMA, then the various laws with regulations, and in every law, business law nowadays, you will see that the regulation speaks about procedure. And a very classic example, if we take Companies Act 56 and 13, 56 was only a rule oriented, only one rule, company code rule was there. But when we look at 13 Act, then you will see that so many rules and regulations for each activity is there. Same way in IBC, then in other law, any new law, you just look at the business law regulations in pre 91 and post 91, then we'll see a very a huge difference. So in that background, I think this session is designed very well, covering the different topics. And I think I should not be a speaker in the technical session. And with this background, I just welcome, let me introduce all the speakers. And already Madam Santi has introduced the co-chair, Dr. Hitesh Thakur. So we have the subject, topics. The first one is corporate social responsibility and regulations in India. Then we have implications of dominance by Nikhil Reddy, and first paper CSR is by Nithar Rose, and then SPAC companies by Rudra Sandilia. Then the gold policies in India by Tinu Joseph, and block holders at the gate, that is by Valentin Valentin Assistant Professor. I think I don't know the designation is not there. Then Indian corporate law, there is a very interesting paper with a core law question that whether Indian corporate law talk about purpose by Mr. Amit Kumar. So we have these 6 speakers today, and I think already Madam Santi has talked about the rules and regulations. And before starting the session, I request the co-chair, Dr. Hitesh Thakur, to speak few words. Then the speakers can start the presentation. Thank you, Madam Santi. Thank you, Professor Thomas, and thank you, Dr. Hitesh Thakur, all the presenters, participants. Thank you so much.
So, thank you, Mamta ma'am. I think Madam has already set the tones and provided the overall the broad theme of how regulation has developed in context of the corporate law and business law. So just I don't want to add anything further, but I want to say that your paper has selected out of 120 papers. So you all deserve for that good round. So what I feel that you get only 20 minutes. So just come to the point as important points what your research outcomes are there. And if you can complete within 70 to 18 minutes and 19 minutes, then we can have discussion of 10 minutes. That's what. With that note, I think we can start with the first presenter. Thank you, ma'am. I think Neetha Rose, I think her paper is first. From corporate social responsibility, madam.
Am I audible?
You're audible. Can you be slightly?
Sorry,
We can hear you, but not clearly, ma'am.
clear.
Can you speak something? Then we can reply, ma'am.
Is it clear, sir?
It's clear, but voice is not as clear as it should be. But you continue, madam. If we find something difficult, we'll let you know.
May I share my presentation?
Yeah.
Is it visible, sir?
It is visible. You can put your microphone near to you, then voice slide maybe get better. I can hear you, but not clearly, madam.
I'm increasing the volume. Hope it is clear now.
Yeah, it's fine. It's now fine.
Okay, wait. I will put it in slideshow mode, sir. Visible, sir?
It's coming. It's in the process. It will come. You can start, ma'am. Yeah, we can see. You can start, ma'am.
Okay, sir. So good afternoon, all. Respected chair, co-chair, and participants of 7th International Conference on Law and Economics. Myself, Neetha Rose. I'm presently working as assistant professor at Kerala Agriculture University, and my specialization is in agricultural economics. So today, I would like to present a paper titled Corporate Social Responsibility Regulations and Agriculture in India. So the present-day market-led economy is dominated by business firm institutions, and these business firms make use of major portions of resources in the society. So firms are very much dependent upon the socio-economic and cultural system existing in the society. So when coming to the resource use, some resource use are accounted and some are not accounted. And the cost of this non-accounted resources is borne by weaker sections of the society. So business firms definitely have commitment to the society, especially in improving the social welfare. So according to FLAG, the interest groups in a business firm can be categorized into 5 groups. So first one is investors, second one is creditors, third one is employees, fourth one is consumers, and fifth one is public. So out of the first 3 groups, they are properly represented. So remaining 2 groups, that is consumers and public, they are not properly represented or poorly represented or misrepresented. So this non-represented group usually belongs to weaker sections of the society. Therefore, the business firm has commitment to the society to include these weaker sections also in the growth and development scenario. Or in other words, we are internalizing the society's resource use of laws by involving the business firms in developmental activities, and this is generally considered as corporate social responsibility. So officially, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization has defined corporate social responsibility as a management concept whereby companies integrate social and environmental concerns in business operations. Or it can be comprehended as a route through which a business firm accomplishes financial, logical, and social objectives triple bottom line approach. Preeti. So
cannot
in
hear
this
you.
financial. Ma'am, is it audible now?
Yeah, it's audible, but your voice was breaking in between what Madam want to say.
Okay, there is some internet connectivity problem is there, sir.
Now it's fine, you continue.
Okay. So the triple bottom line approach is better conceived as estimating or revealing the firm's performance against economic, social, and environmental performance. Then India is the first country to mandate CSR as a law. Then in 11th five-year plan itself, we have adopted the inclusive growth as our development strategy. So in tune with that, in 2009, Ministry of Corporate Affairs has issued the voluntary gain guidelines for corporate social responsibility. And that was regarded as the first step towards the concept of CSR. So this was additionally refined by taking the recommendation from a report submitted by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance on Companies Bill 2009, and 2011 Ministry of Corporate Affairs again issued the National Voluntary Guidelines NVG on social, environmental, and economic responsibilities of the business. So according to NVG, there are 9 principles, in which 8th principle is exclusively dealing with the inclusive growth and equitable development. That means which emphasize on the emerging business firms' actions on national development priorities. So the principle NVG, this principle NVG was subsequently translated into compulsory provision of CSR in Section 135 of Companies Act 2013. So this legislation asks the corporate firms to rearrange their business models in such a way that it contributes to the government efforts in growth and development. So the Act mandates every company qualifying under the Section 135(1) to make a statutory disclosure of CSR in its annual report in a prescribed format. So companies having a minimum net worth of 500 crores or turnover of 1,000 crores or net income of 5 crores will come under the CSR regulations, and the firm should pay a minimum of 2% of the average net profits of preceding 3 years. And if there is any non-compliance in CSR regulation, Ministry of Consumer Affairs have to issue notices to them. So that about a brief about the corporate social responsibility regulations in India. And when coming to the agriculture sector, ma'am, am I audible now?
Yeah, audible, ma'am.
Oh, okay. So coming to the agriculture sector, so agriculture sector is providing livelihood for more than 50% of the population. So improvising the investments in agriculture and thereby doubling the farmers' income is one of the important areas, twin important areas focused by the government, and the CSR activities can certainly contribute to that one, or they can certainly fill the gap for achieving this objectives. So CSR funding can also be streamlined according to the sustainable development goals also. So realizing the potential of CSR activities, my study, it's a humble attempt to analyze the status of CSR spending towards the agriculture and allied activities with the following research objectives as to analyze the status of CSR spending towards agriculture and allied activities, and also to review the status and general compliance of CSR activity in India as well as the CSR compliance. So the study is based on the secondary data, and data was compiled from the National CSR Data Portal maintained by Ministry of Corporate Affairs. The data collected for 6 years, from a period of 2014-15 to 2019-20. And these are the major variables we have observed in that. CSR spending, development sector-wise CSR spending, CSR disclosure compliance, and also we have confined the study to the top 10 contributors and the activity, the list of activities carried out by the top 10 contributors to the CSR. Then we have analyzed the data in following way, using descriptive statistical methods, compound annual growth rate, and tabular and percentage analysis also. Then moving to the results and discussion, CSR expenditure status in the 3 variables we have considered. One is number of CSR projects committed by the firms, and also the amount spent, CSR amount actually spent, and also the number of companies disclose the CSR activities in their annual reports. So we can see an increasing trend in almost all the variables. But when coming to the annual growth rate, compound annual growth rate, that is 28% increase per annum was seen in case of the number of CSR projects, 16% increase in case of the amount spent, and also only 5% increase per annum has happened in case of CSR disclosure. So this is a matter of concern, and we have to address this CSR disclosure, maybe by stricter laws. Then if we are moving to the development sector-wise CSR expenditure, you can see that the government has identified nearly 14 sectors and 29 subsectors. In that, education sector has bagged the major portion with 89% contribution from CSR funds, followed by health sector, and area of interest, environment and only 5% of CSR expenditure. So we can see the clear imbalance in expenditure among the development sectors. So this can be addressed maybe by mandatory capping can be given to each and every development sector, like that in other things can be proposed. Then again, we are focusing on the environmental related, agriculture related activities. In that, we also taken 3 variables in that number of projects and also the earmarked amount and also the actual amount spent. So again, everything is in that number of projects committed in agriculture and allied activities. It is showing a negative growth rate. Whereas earmarked around is growing a positive, that is 18% increase per annum. But the actual amount spent is also too small, that is 2.35, that is nearly 3% increase per annum has happened in agriculture and allied activities. And in case of environment and natural resources activities, number of projects committed has shown 18% increase per annum. But the earmarked around as well as the actual amount spent has shown a negative growth rate, especially in case of actual amount spent in environment and natural resource activities. It is deeply negative, or it is 11% reduction per annum has happened in that one. So this is also an area of concern. Then if we are listing about the development activities carried out under environment and agriculture, in that we can see only 5 or 6 activities, development activities under each sector. But we know that agriculture and environment, it is highly diversified. It is highly diversified and it is highly fragile also. So according to the nature of the sectors, the activities, diversified development activities has to be added, or according to region-wise or ecosystem-wise, like activities, development activities has to be included under these sectors. Then regarding the compliance on CSR activity, the compliance is increasing. It's around 40% currently. So with the more stricter enforcement of law, the complaints can be improved. Then moving to the complaints on CSR activity, that CSR, among the CSR compliant companies, the actual expenditure less than the committed expenditure. On an average, 4,000 companies has actual expenditure is less than committed expenditure. And around 5,000 companies have actual expenditure is more than the committed expenditure. So the right side, that 5,000 figure is positive, but the left side it is something negative. So concluding my study, that CSR spending is increasing year on year, but disclosure is not getting improved as in tune with that of the CSR spending. Then development sector wise also, education sector has received the highest share, but only 5% has received by the environment and agriculture sector. Then less diversified development activities were carried out in agriculture and environmental sectors. So more diversified or region specific development projects has to be committed in these areas. Then actual CSR fund spent in agriculture and allied activities is showing a very minimal increase, whereas in environment it is exhibiting a deep negative growth. Then CSR compliance is gradually getting improved. Then actual CSR amount is more than committed amount among the CSR compliant companies. 48% companies having actual CSR expenditure amount is more than the committed amount, and 39% of companies has actual CSR expenditure amount is less than the committed amount. Then only 21% of the earmarked amount for the environmental stability and natural resource conservation is actually spent. It's an area of concern because we are living in an era of climate change as well as natural disasters. So more and more investments should happen in the environment and natural resource area. So, but the limitation may be the difficulty in implementing the projects because agriculture and natural resource or environment, plus the project designing itself requires some experts. So scarcity of that experts, the regional specificity, these all things may be affecting the CSR expenditure or CSR fund allocation. Then definitely agriculture and environment requires more attention. Then CSR initiatives to this development sectors needs mandatory allocation, just like of lending in that priority sector lending, we have some percentage like that for each sector. We can mandatorily mention the requirements of allocation. Then CSR regulation also facing so many CSR implementation, regulation implementation is also facing so many challenges in India. So the implementing agencies has to be properly educated. Then the evaluation of CSR activity is not happening nowadays. So the evaluation of CSR activity outcome is important to understand the failures and for further improvement also. So altogether, the CSR has the potential that can maliciously support government in achieving the inclusive growth and development. So I will close. I will stop my presentation with a quote by William Ford. There is creating a strong business and building a better world is not a conflicting goal, as they are both essential ingredients for long-term success. So thank you all for your attention.
So, any question from any participants? I think in the chat box also there is no question. So I request all the participants, if any question, please you can either unmute your audio and you can ask, or you can type also, please.
Also, you can ask, Lex, you can unmute and ask the question.
Anita ma'am, I have a question, ma'am. Shall I ask?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, does the mandatory provision of CSR expenditure on agriculture sector will help to bring the farming sector out of the distress?
This cannot be answered with one such sentence because I think that it can definitely help. Because altogether there is no panacea for addressing the agriculture distress in the country. So it can definitely influence or it can definitely reduce that one by attracting more investments.
Okay, ma'am.
Madam, are you talking about investment or expenditure?
Expenditure in terms of infrastructure projects that has happened now.
Like cold storage infrastructure.
Yes, like that. The modernizing investments, that can definitely help.
Any?
Madam, can I ask with your permission? Yeah. First of all, Madam, I think I congratulate that you are talking CSR with, I think, talking very important sector, which is quite significantly important, as we know in economics that major employment contributions are coming from there. Despite of that, they are not getting the significant GDP in the contribution, but still very important sector. And what are the infrastructure hurdle which public sector could not provide? I think CSR can pump in and can do. And I also find a good idea of capping a weightage given to the agriculture sector. Only just only agriculture sector will not. But if you can put agriculture and rural development, I think that because your topic do talk about agriculture, but I don't know if you can further broaden into rural development. I think that will also make something the different impact. But just only one thing I was thinking in the context of CSR, what I find that generally the companies are located or in that place where mostly infrastructures are provided to them. So they are not located to the very interior part of the countryside, they are to the extreme rural side. So whatever the CSR activity will happen, generally you are affected towards where you get place and where you are doing. Like you can tell in Gujarat we have Mudra project, they may be affected toward the Kutch region near to that part like that. Yeah, something on that line, or maybe other example maybe of Reliance and that near to Jamnagar place. So what I feel that we can't make mandatory to company to do, but if something happen where the disparities areas can be the certain fund can be allocated, then what sir was talking about distress and other thing, I think it can be go beyond that also. If the though this there is no duty of company to do that because it's part of a government sector to do, but still the what they are getting from the society, I think they can provide to at least who is required that benefit. So in that context, that's what I want to comment. But otherwise, a good attempt and good try with regard to putting agriculture sector specific perspective of CSR. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for the comments.
Neeta ma'am, so it's not a question, ma'am. It's just a suggestion, ma'am. So if you have adopted any regression or some other thing, ma'am, so if you estimated the impact, so that will be more apt one, ma'am. That means that if 1% of CSR increases, so how much the productivity may increases. So like that, we can able to provide the result more appropriately, ma'am. So,
Yes, sir, it is.
yeah.
Yes, sir, it is definitely a good suggestion, but the unavailability of data is a problem, sir. Only 6 data points with the time series data, how we can analyze. That is a question. That is a limitation for that.
Okay,
That
ma'am.
is why I didn't attempt that.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, Mamata ma'am, please unmute yourself, ma'am.
I'm so sorry. I just I was requesting the participants if any more question, please ask. There is one question I think already you have asked, Dr. Thomas, and there is one question from Mr. Abhishek. Any regions have been identified for low or high expenditure in one or other sector? Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Madam, maybe the implementation, difficulties in implementation, because for environment, agriculture, it requires the region-specific projects. So more expert designed projects are required for showing some results. Maybe because of that. You can see that agriculture sector has received 39% because it is something easy when compared to agriculture that I feel. That may
Yes.
be a reason.
Region, what I feel, there is no cap also that you should spend in this sector this much. So the freedom is
Yes,
with the corporate sectors. They have to just spend it. And as per the Schedule 7 of the Companies Act, the activities which were mentioned, and also as per the CSR policy. So I don't know, Mr. Abhishek. So there is no particular legal reason or any policy related decision, but it is the liberty of the corporate sector where to spend. How to spend is defined, and where to spend and in what way, what would be the amount, all those things I think is not mentioned. So any other question? Yes, yes. Can this discretion be regulated? Yes, why not? Because that is what the theme of this session. And slowly, I think everything is regulated. Maybe tomorrow a new amendment may come to the CSR policy. If you see the Schedule 7 also, the original activities and today the amendments after COVID, then there are changes so that I think your question will be answered in the next 1 year or 2, 3 years that some changes may be there. But I don't know whether Madam Nita has any answer for this question.
Sir, ma'am, definitely regulation can help if mandatorily, if we are capping that this much should spend in this sector means it will work. What I feel is it will work. If it comes, it's good.
Okay, so yeah, there is another question from CS. It is written, but any studies in other countries which examines the effect of agriculture in its productivity? So whether I don't know madam's limitation and scope of research, I think she has only the research in the area of Indian law and in expenditure in India under section 135. But I don't know whether she has. Madam, have you done any research of any study in any other country which examines the effect of CSR in agriculture?
Such empirical studies are lacking, I think. So whether any new studies have added upon, we have to wait, ma'am. Empirical studies. we have to do.
Ma'am, so there are some studies in India, ma'am. So for agriculture productivity, even for specific crops itself, they are having, ma'am. So they have used the frontier analysis or some technical efficiency analysis. So there are so many studies in India itself, ma'am.
Whether
Connecting to or CSR spending or
Not related to CSR, ma'am. So like
this question is about, I think, CSR, the
yeah.
effect
So
of CSR in agriculture. It is a very specific question.
yes, ma'am. So as Neeta ma'am said that the problem is with data, ma'am. So that if it is data is not available, so we can't able to do that.
Any other question? So, Madam, congratulations for a very good presentation. And Hitesh sir, do you want to say anything to the first presenter?
No, I think she has attempted well. I think there is a possibility of some law and economic analysis. Though you are talking in data, but same can be in theoretical, their conceptual framework can be made. That's what I can say. Otherwise, you have good attempted. And sir was talking about some regression, and that I also see that you have very less samples. So how far that will be reliable and how far that model may be help. There was one question in one of the participant want to ask that why there's a discretion between this pattern, like once it is increasing, the other time it is reducing. If you want to answer that, I think that will be great.
I think she has answered something.
Okay, then fine.
She has answered, I think. And also I added that till now there is no mandatory provision for expenditure. And the can this discretion to be regulated? I think that is answered. All the questions are answered, I think. So do you want, sir, again, can madams answer or what?
No. I think if she has answered, it's fine. Yeah. I understand it is not possible to have same, I think, discretion of the companies on it. But I thought if she have got any additional query why such difference was there, I think she has already answered. I find it.
Yes. So coming, I think there is no more question. And while congratulating Madam Nita for this presentation, just I have few points because research is such an area nobody can comment, but with the inputs and analysis we can learn more. So why have you used, madam, this CSR regulation? in your topic?
Because in my first part of the paper, I'm briefing about the CSR regulations and how it is getting connected to the agriculture. That is why I mentioned
I
that.
think in CSR, there is no such regulation. The statutory provision, that is section 135, then the CSR policy is there. And the CSR policy means every corporate sector, they have to prepare as per the CSR rule. So maybe those points, if it is a good paper, but I just suggest you may accept or not. If you can add this CSR rule, CSR policy, that is one of the requirement. The companies, they have to prepare the CSR policy, and there are amendments to the schedule, because your focus is on the activities, but you have not mentioned about Schedule 7. That is very important for your paper. Schedule 7, the different activities are mentioned, and COVID also, the change is there. And another thing, I think you questioned during your presentation, that why this imbalance is there in 2019 and 2020. In that particular data, the table you have prepared, you questioned that why it is imbalance, we have to see. So have you looked at the impact of COVID? Because the other till 1919, everything was going up, but suddenly in 20, that the figure is very not very low, but it is low, and you only raise this question that why this imbalance, we have to see. So maybe it can be impact of COVID also. I do not. I feel, because the data how it is prepared also we do not know. So that is one thing, because you only raised that question. Now coming to this agriculture, because it is one of the very interesting area, and already the questions are there relating to the discretion in regulating the CSR activities by Abhishek, and also some question. I think one question was there about this discretion for acquire the differences there in the different sector. And what I told, and also you have presented, till today, I think there is no such mandatory provision that how much amount should be spent for what activity. So that depends maybe, and also what Hitesh sir said, the geographical conditions and the jurisdiction. So the registered office of a company may be situated in a big city, metro, where they may not extend their activities to a very rural area. And but there are very good companies who are very famous for this, like if you see the Dabur and other company, so their activities are very diversified. And nowadays also the increase is there, not only 2%. Many companies, they do more than that. But this question, what some participants asked, it is still there, that why this is not regulated. Maybe in the near future it will be regulated. And also one point, I do not know whether it will be connected. So there is a concept of this producer company, because you are in agriculture sector, and in producer company, what they do, the any 10 producers, they can also incorporate a producer company, where they get many benefits, because when you form a company and you take loan and then you cannot repay, then those producers, they don't face those problems like in individual capacity they face. So that is one area, even though it is not very directly connected with CSR, but nowadays the even the government is looking for some research like last year there was a proposal also that for producer companies there should be a separate law how they will be protected. That is very connected with the agriculture sector. So and will this impact change in crop pattern from food crop to commercial crop? So madam, what impact? Uh, I do not think why the crop pattern will change, because that is just a financial benefit extended by the corporate sectors because of Section 135. And there is no provision that only if you extend to agricultural sector, the crop pattern has to be changed. So
Ma'am, I was asking because there are incentives of corporates to, channel CSR towards more profitable crops. So would that channelize the CSR towards a certain section of agriculture compared to food crop versus commercial crop? In that sense, because that is the incentives of corporations, because CSR will also, there will be some advantages for the corporations also. So in that kind of a mutual bargain, will it shift the crop pattern? And does that have questions with regard to, food availability and access?
I don't think, madam, there will be any impact in this area. Maybe if Madam Nita can speak about that. But I feel in the next 10 years also there won't be any impact in the change in crop pattern.
Ma'am, changing crop pattern.
No, Madam Santi, I think Madam has written that change in Punjab and Haryana is not due to CSR. Madam, I think Madam.
No, Professor, I'm not telling. This is because of CSR. Like how Dr. Ranita is questioning this, investing CSR amount much of agricultural produce could in the future might transfer, from what you say that the traditional crop to some kind of a commercial crop might impact.
Because there what I feel, because what you wrote also, the rise to wheat, that may be the change in environment or the climate change. I do not know the reason, but what Madam is saying, I cannot foresee that in next 10 years this impact will be there. Yes,
Ma'am, rise to wheat happened because of the price differentials and cost of production. So that is the connection.
Connection, that impact of CSR, that
and
I
the
cannot
quantum of
foresee.
MSP. So that is the price and that is the cost. So, Swaminathan report.
That is a very different aspect. But when this impact of CSR, I do not foresee that any farmer will shift from the traditional crop to commercial crop because of this incentives by the corporate sector. And also when they spend also, madam, this procedure, there is no particular procedure, and also there is nothing mentioned in the law or in the rule or in the policy of the company, various companies, that how they spend. Only the main direction in that provision that you have to spend, and you have to spend in those activities which are mentioned in Schedule 7 of the Companies Act. So that is where I think maybe if amendments will take place, and in future may happen. But again, when it is this agricultural area, because that is again all this scientific, because I think Madam Nita can say more than me, because so many factors are responsible, because your soil, water facility, irrigation facility. So then only the nature of crop one can decide. It is not only because of incentive or money or the monetary benefit which will be extended by the corporate sector. The nature of crop can be changed, where you cannot grow rice. How can you go for, if rice will be the one of the very demanding product in this market, but your soil and water is not fit for that? How can one do? So there, I think various other factors, and what you said, maybe in future it can, because, but from law point of view, I cannot foresee that extending the scope of CSR by corporate sector to agricultural sector may impact in changing the crop pattern from food to commercial crop.
Thank you very much, Professor Biswal. We will continue our discussion
Thank you, madam.
beyond this platform. Thank you so much.
So this is a very, because the one is CSR, only my suggestion to Madam Nita was that if you can just cover on this policy and regulation word, I think is not a proper word to be used in this title, because there is no such regulation in CSR. So CSR policy framework or CSR rules we have. Yes. So I think with this we can conclude the first presentation. And thank you very much, madam. And all these questions might have provoked you to go for the next stage of research, because you are from agriculture cultural sector and you have combined law with that. And thank you very much. So may I request Mr. Nikhil Reddy to present the paper?
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So, good evening, everybody. I'm Nikhil Reddy Kothakota. I'm a fifth-year student from Symbiosis Law School, Hyderabad. And as I said, I'm a law student. I'm training to become a lawyer. So please forgive me for not having many data points in my paper. My topic is on dominance of healthcare providers during the COVID pandemic. So dominance, according to competition law, is essentially what happens when a enterprise, as we define under competition law, can operate without looking into without looking into consumer needs, as there is inelastic demand, and they do not have to pay attention to competitors. They have acquired a position.
Nikhil, do you have PPT?
No, ma'am. I can share my paper,
I'm
ma'am.
sorry.
I do not have a.
Okay, no problem. We have your paper. You please proceed.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So they gain a position in the market due to which they can act independent of any other players. That is dominance according to Section 4 of the Competition. So, in my opinion, the CCI, the Competition Commission of India, in the healthcare industry, it has looked into detail at how the pharmaceutical sector works and why certain steps have to be taken in order to reduce the dominant position or cartelization that might be taking place in the pharmaceutical sector. But the healthcare provider sector, that is specifically hospitals which provide services to patients, have not been paid much attention to. This is probably because the CCI believes that this is more of a consumer demand. This is something that more consumer fora are supposed to look at as compared to a competition forum. But as I will show in the paper, especially during health emergencies such as COVID, or even localized epidemics or pandemics such as we seasonally have, whether it be flu, dengue, malaria, or anything of that sort, in such situations, the CCI must be especially vigilant in seeing if local hospitals become dominant. So I initially start off my paper by talking about how So I take the COVID-19, the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic as a paradigm example. I try to see how the CCI could have acted in such circumstances, in order to draw out a model for the CCI to act in further such public health emergencies. So what we have seen, especially during the second wave, is that state governments, especially through a lot of clinical establishment acts and epidemic diseases acts of their own states, they had taken over the facilities of hospitals. They had reserved certain portions of beds for COVID patients only. And more importantly, they had price cap charges for treatment. Now, this can be for PPE kits, for diagnostic treatments, for ventilators, for ICU beds, oxygen beds, and anything of that sort. So they had price cap the charges. I believe that the efficacy of such a solution that the state governments had come up with is questionable. Firstly, because reserving beds for patients had a huge impact on non-COVID patients who still required daily healthcare services. That was not taken into account. And secondly, price capping, when it is applied indiscriminately to large, medium, and small enterprises, has an effect on pushing the medium and small enterprises out of the market, because they do not have any capacity whatsoever to cross subsidize or to recover losses because of the prices being capped very low. And the kind of medium and small enterprises that I'm talking about here are, and I quote this from an article, most mom and pop enterprises, which are very small hospitals, especially present in various districts where we don't have good public healthcare systems. So when we price cap them low, we see an effect of them going out of business, which would result in subsequent harm to consumers as well. So as an alternative to this, like I've said, I want to propose the CCI take action to reduce dominance in the healthcare sector to keep the services affordable. So usually under Section 4, 3 steps are to be followed to establish dominance. The first is we have to assess what is the relevant market. Next, we have to analyze whether the enterprise that we have taken into consideration is dominant in that market. So Section 4 is not a per se assumption such as cartelization. What happens is whenever the CCI finds that enterprises have cartelized, it is automatically assumed that there is an adverse effect on competition. But however, dominance is not a per se assumption. We can take the example of Amazon. It is most definitely dominant, but the cases under it have to be whether there was any abuse of dominance has to be proved by the CCI. So naturally, the third step of establishing dominance would be to prove if any abuse of dominance had taken place. So one problem that we encounter with regards to establishing dominance in the healthcare sector, especially in India where there is lack of much jurisprudence, is that India's healthcare system differs radically from the healthcare systems we find in countries such as in the EU, where there are Beveridge, which are publicly funded, or Bismarck, which are employer or state funded, or in the USA, where there is a high insurance coverage. In India, we have Ayushman Bharat, which is the most recent scheme, and different state schemes such as Xiii, which are in coordination with Ayushman Bharat in the Telangana state. But we see that frequently hospitals overcharge that. The coverage offered is not enough, and there are a lot of problems with the ultimate beneficiaries even getting the benefits in the first place. So the system is very different. So there cannot be a direct comparison of the healthcare systems of healthcare systems in the EU and the US with that of India. So having said that, I'll move on to the question of establishing relevant markets. So in order to establish relevant markets, we have to see what could be the probable abuses. Now, if we see what could be the probable abuses, they either fall under Section 42A1 or 2 of the Competition Act, which is imposition of unfair conditions in purchase of sale, such as making the patients compulsorily buy medications, no matter whether quality control is required over them or not, medications, consumables or such, or there is an unfair pricing, whether it be regards to ventilators, rooms, beds, medicines, consumables, etc. So the CCI has stated multiple. So within the healthcare sector, there are different healthcare provider sector. There are different sections again: primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. So while the primary and quaternary sectors are relatively well defined, there is not much of a differentiation between secondary and tertiary. The CCI itself has held this in various merger cases, wherein it said that wherein it said that frequently secondary and tertiary healthcare systems are clubbed together in such a manner that a patient is undergoing secondary treatment at one point during his stay, and then he might undergo tertiary treatment, and then he might come back again to secondary treatment. An example of that would include observation for COVID. So now when a patient is put under observation for COVID, he would be under secondary treatment. However, when his symptoms worsen, he would need, let's say, the help of a ventilator. That would qualify as tertiary treatment. Then again, if his symptoms gradually improve, he would have to be put back in secondary treatment. So there's not much of a differentiation that can be made. So the relevant market in a particular geographical area, that's something I'll come to, has to be inpatient care. Inpatient meaning secondary and tertiary healthcare delivery systems. Now, the question of whether only private healthcare or whether public healthcare also has to be considered arises. So what happens is, in a lot of cases, the CCI, even though the investigation and the cases have not come to a complete conclusion yet, they held that both private hospitals and public hospitals have to be considered together. There is no classifiable differentiation. There is no differentiation per se between them. This was held in the Hirandani hospital case as well. Here the DG had said that considering different factors such as economic, social factors, peer pressure, social perceptions, and brand value of hospital, only super specialty hospitals have to be taken into consideration. But the CCI later said that that is not how usually competition law works. If there are of comparable services, all hospitals have to be taken into consideration. But I propose in my paper that there could be a case of asymmetrical substitution, meaning that all services that could be available in a public hospital can definitely be available in private hospital during health emergencies. But the same services which are available in a private hospital might not be available in public hospitals due to lack of health infrastructure from the very beginning, or due to a high number of cases and a high number of patients. So I believe there is a case to be made of why only certain private hospitals in given locality, such as which have the ventilator facility, should be taken into consideration in the relevant market. But however, at the end of the day, depending upon how stressed the hospitals are and the infrastructure they have from the very beginning, can either be inpatient COVID super specialty hospitals, or it can be private inpatient COVID hospitals only. That is my proposition with regards to the product market. Now, when it comes to the geographical market, thankfully, the distinction is relatively much more clearer, in the sense that there is an established precedence in various merger cases, or in different cases the C has looked at. Usually, especially considering the fact that a lot of hospitals where such dominance can arise are located in cities or in the industrial areas of the districts, that particular metropolitan area, or the particular part of the district and the surrounding areas, which are usually semi-urban or peri-rural, such areas are taken into consideration. So in this case called as a max super specialty hospital case, the DG had ordered investigation of only hospitals within a 12-kilometer radius. This was held to be arbitrary by CCI and said that all the hospitals in Delhi and the surrounding areas have to be examined. And I agree to that, because then otherwise we would be defining our relevant geographical market too narrowly, and that would be disadvantageous to the enterprise as well. So once we have established the relevant product and geographical market, we would have to move towards looking at how the CI can establish dominance. So even though it is a usual practice in a lot of countries such as South Africa, wherein if there is a more than 45% market share market, the firm is considered to be dominant. In India, there is no such parameter. This is mentioned in the Raghavan Committee report, which was instrumental in implementing the Competition Act. It said that when you give very narrow specific perimeters, you miss out on the quote unquote real offenders. So there could be an enterprise with just a market share of 20%, and in that particular market, it could still be playing a dominant role because it is the main player. And there could be another enterprise in which, say, the market share is 60%, but it could not be dominant because maybe of lack of much consumer demand. So that's why there is no bright line distinction as such in terms of dominance. And we look at the different factors in section 19, which are the criteria for establishing dominance. If we look at the second wave of COVID, which again, to reiterate, I've taken as a paradigm example, we see the market structure in the particular local market. Very highly stressed situation, a highly stressed market, a lot of inelastic demand. Consumers are merely price takers. This is a word was used in the DLF case in order to establish that there was lack of any countervailing buying power whatsoever. And not to forget to mention, private hospitals in metropolitan areas have more than double the infrastructure that public hospitals have. And this is something that is standard in lower and middle income countries. So like I've said again, we can't take into consideration how foreign jurisdictions operate with regards to private versus public healthcare. And there is a provision in section 19 about whether the scalability of operation should be considered. I argue that the benefits of scalability of operations by the private healthcare centers and the advantages that they have can be advantages in terms of reduced costs. But when there is lack of countervailing buying power, when there is lack of any consumer power whatsoever, it have any effects in terms of reduced costs whatsoever. The healthcare sector in India is still at a very nascent stage. So if we don't take a more nuanced interpretation, I believe, and just directly interpose the concepts that are present in EU jurisprudence onto Indian competition jurisprudence, we can preclude better differentiation of markets in the future, and that is going to make us worse off in terms of dealing with health emergency. And like I've mentioned again, the asymmetric substitutability in the market also has to be taken into consideration. This is something that is mentioned by the CCI in a policy note that it had released in 2018 itself. It also talks about something called as the doctor-hospital nexus, wherein there is asymmetric information for consumers. They do not have the complete information to make a complete informed choice, and hence they should not be taken as rational customers. So because of that, we have to look at consumers, especially in the healthcare delivery sector, as more vulnerable to the abuse of dominance by the healthcare delivery providers. Like I mentioned, there is lack of countervailing buying power. And most importantly, and I feel the need to reiterate this, consumers in such circumstances only price takers. Consumers are no longer rational customers who are able to choose for themselves, but they are in such a need of the services that they are price takers. Okay, 15 minutes up. Okay, I will speed up. There is one more way we can look at dominance, and that is to look at dominance in the aftermarket. So once a person has become privy to a hospital, the hospital has free rein to charge whatever price it possibly can. However, this has been held in various cases about such as in the automobile spare parts case, wherein for the after services of car repair, because they were already privy to the contact with the automobile provider manufacturer in the primary market, all the services had to go through him only. So this results in him charging more and more than what normally would be charged if this was an open market. So this is something we can consider, such as, for example, in charging of diagnostic tests or in charging hospital rooms. We could look at it as a monopoly obtained in the aftermarket. However, I say that these analysis might not be enough because for one thing, dominance has to be assessed through a period of time, not just at one point in time, like I'm proposing in my paper. So that requires us to look at how why dominance can immediately arise under certain stress situations. And for that, I turn towards EU competition jurisprudence, although I'm not directly transposing their concepts. I turn towards EU competition jurisprudence, and they have two concepts called as collective dominance and relative dominance. In collective dominance, basically instances of price signaling or price paralleling can be countered. So what happens in a lot of cases, especially in stress situations such as in COVID, there might be a hospital which is charging a certain high price, and there could be hospitals which might be charging lower. But looking at the inelastic demand that is there, these charges can follow the price that is set by the leader in the market. It is similar with price signaling in such a manner that due to the fact that there is no incentive to undercut each other, all the hospitals may maintain a constantly similar price. Now, this kind of similar price is without any cartelization whatsoever. If it was cartelization, it would come under Section 3, and that would be looked at as under that particular section. But here, the hospitals just find it rational, quote unquote rational, in order to keep their prices elevated. They are in fact incentivized to keep their prices elevated. That is collective dominance. And in relative dominance, this is more of a rare case. In the EU, there's this case of Rbi Oil. This was during a 1973 OPEC oil crisis, wherein a distributor of oil came under the direct influence and the direct control of a producer of oil. And that producer later started charging him more and started delivering less and less barrels of oil. This led to the European Commission holding that relative to the producer of the oil, the distributor was in a position of economic dependence. Or put in other words, the producer was in a position of relative dominance to the distributor. I believe a parallel can be drawn with regards to this and how that hospitals and patients. However, this is more of a tricky situation because it can result in a lot of type 1 situations where there is a lot of over-regulation. But for that also, we can look at EU jurisprudence again, wherein this kind of judgment, this kind of ratio was not upheld when there were no emergency situations in that particular geographic market. So only when the situation is extremely exceptional, extremely exceptional, can such a concept of relative dominance be looked at. Now, looking at now that once we establish, could I go on for 2 minutes?
Can you please come to your recommendation in 1
Yes,
minute?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So I believe that the major point that I had, one of the major points I had to make was that there is a reluctance to prosecuting excessive pricing cases because there is a common belief, and to a certain extent warranted, that markets are self-regulating. Whenever there is a enterprise charging too much, new enterprises will enter the market, which can help stabilize the prices. However, when we look at the healthcare sector in India, first thing, there are very high natural and legal barriers to entry. Legal barriers being more than 20 laws and regulations for which compliance is required. And due to the inelastic demand, like I have been reiterating, or whoever is a new player that enters, they are bound to be fringe players only. They cannot have much effect on the market. And even if they do have much effect on the market, there is no guarantee whatsoever that they won't follow the price leadership due to the lack of countervailing buying power. So I propose that I propose we need to get rid of this principle of the fact that markets can always be self-regulating. Majority of the time they are, but not in such circumstances. And talk about how information asymmetry must be reduced in the markets, and why a lot of commitment decisions, wherein settlement agreements or consent decrees are entered into with hospitals to remove market distortions immediately. That is the only way, I believe, in which immediate relief can be given to consumers, as well as the asymmetry in the market that is there can be taken care of. I'm done, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Nikhil. Congratulations for a very good presentation. So now the floor is open for questions, but we have only 8 minutes. So very quickly, maybe we can ask the question and Mr. Nikhil can answer. Please.
Can I make any comment, madam, if you, with your permission, madam?
Yes, sir. If you want now, please, please.
Yeah, I think Nikhil, you have tried a very complicated topic in the context of the Competition Commission, and you have taken the case analysis and try to make your points with regard to the market principle. But I have some doubt, like when you talk about the asymmetric information, you know, in theoretical context, when we talk about the lemon market, then we know that one player is having the clear information, a complete information, versus the other. Maybe seller may have complete information in comparison with the buyer. When we talk about the used car, I personally think it was not with regard to the asymmetric information. It was with regard to both sides, from the demander and from the supplier side, both sides, the incomplete information. One other point, you talk about the market, but personally, if you ask the context of the pandemic was not only Indian context, one state context, it was globally. So it was not market context, it was fully about market failure context, how in that failure, how we can still minimize the aspect and talk something about the how market still can provide the solution. Now, when you see from the risk point of view, you are still just taking to the only those people in the context which can afford the private. Now, just try to see in the risk context, whose risk is more, the people who can't earn a daily wages. So risk to them is comparatively significantly very, very high, who are living in the below poverty line. And in fact, infection of chances are also significantly very, very high. So forget about, they're already excluded from the what you are talking about, the some of the abuse of dominance may be done from the private player side. But here was with regard to the infrastructure sector side from the all context, like, and this was not the failure problem in the context of one country per se. The majorly affected, mostly, I think all the world were affected, and there was huge expose of the public health system in the context of what we all were experiencing. So still you have done something in context of CCI. I still find some interesting point, but when you see from the point of view of the some conceptual point of view, I find some the microeconomics may not be relevant in context, and maybe Competition Commission points irrespective of the judgment, irrespective of the observation. This was something as a system as a whole market failure, and how you deal, I think that we know what happened. So this, I have some comment on that. And otherwise, thank you for your effort for taking such a very tricky topic in context of the market. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir, I completely agree. In fact, one of the limitations that I mentioned in my paper is about how this is not going to remedy the lack of public health infrastructure at all. And it's only a temporary measure that can be taken. So I completely agree with your points, sir.
Any more question? Yes, I think there is no question in the chat box also. Mr. Nikhil, I just have this, you refer to this automobile auto part case. I think
Yes, ma'am.
So how relevant is that to this dominance in the healthcare provider sector?
So in that case, what had happened was customers who had got automobiles in the primary market, which is from the automobile
Was the
manufacturer.
relating to the Hyundai and Honda, few
Yes,
companies?
ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So, yes.
Yes, ma'am. So basically, it's about aftermarket abuse. I try to relate it to how aftermarket abuse, in terms of how once a patient has already been admitted into a hospital, there could be excessive pricing or unfair tying with unnecessary stuff that is there. So, but it's also a limitation because not everything can be aftermarket abuse. Stuff like diagnostic tests, consumables, medications are very much a part of the primary market of healthcare itself. So in that way, I try to relate, but then offer that even this concept in Indian jurisprudence is not enough, because of which we need to look at collective and relative dominance in EU jurisprudence.
But have you come across any such issue during the COVID? That abuse of dominance in healthcare?
Yes, ma'am. In the EU, especially countries like
No, in
Spain and
India.
in India, it has mostly been confined to the pharmaceutical sector, ma'am. There has not been any proactive stance other than notifications, or I would say warnings, in a sense, issued by the CCI with regards to how to conduct oneself in a COVID-19 market. But there has not been any
But whether
proactive action that has been taken.
CCI has jurisdiction to pass such order how to conduct in the COVID market?
It's a part of its advocacy efforts, ma'am. So it does. It has.
Advocacy activities is a different section 36 or which?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but whether CCI has such power in the Competition Act to issue directions how to conduct in market. CCI jurisdiction is to
Yes, ma'am.
regulate and to prevent the anti-competitive issues. But whether the CCI has power to give direction for how to conduct in market.
So what happens usually, as far as I know, is under the advocacy provisions, they issue guidelines which are not enforceable unless and until they prosecute the particular enterprise. After prosecuting under penalties, it can direct it to refrain from making certain agreements. It can direct it to make certain agreements. But usually CCI does not indulge in any behavioral remedies, as far as I understand, because it has an effect on disrupting the market. Most of their work is in trying to remove any any sort of failure that might be there, but not in telling enterprises how to conduct themselves.
Okay. And you also spoke about some private hospital, the infrastructure facilities double than the public hospitals. And but I didn't understand this point, that how such kind of private hospital can abuse the dominance.
So this is something that, again, like Sir has said, I don't think lack of public health infrastructure can compensate for the lack of, even if there is dominance or even if there is no dominance in the healthcare delivery sector, we still need private infrastructure. So I looked at it from the point of elevated and exorbitant pricing in private hospitals in metropolitan areas, which have more than twice the amount of infrastructure or readily available infrastructure as compared to public hospitals. So I believe if any issues of dominance were to arise, they would arise in such hospitals.
And maybe it is not a surprise. I think you must be knowing, you have done so much research. EU, UK, all these countries, they have, they have issued some specific direction during COVID. But in India, I think CCI had issued one order where the applicant to file the filing of applications under section 3, 4, and 5 were suspended from March 2020.
Yes,
March,
ma'am.
there was one order by the CCI. So that during that time, that is why it was so difficult, because some examples also people have cited that when the N95 mask was sold for some, say, 250 rupees, but when it was shortage in the market and it raised to 500. So when a necessity, necessity knows no law. And so in that case, I don't know, really I'm thinking when you started your presentation that how to, because we do not have any proper facility. Till today, our health sector is not, we should not say up to the mark, but it is weak. The health sector is inadequate. And but during COVID, all these filing of applications were suspended, and the people can take the defense necessity, knows no law in the public interest, in the interest of the patient. And because here the issues are very different, that is why really it is a very interesting paper. And I was just listening to you. You must have seen the medical the bill. In one hospital used to be 10 lakhs, in another it could be 2 lakhs, in a government hospital it could be free of cost, only 300, 400 if it is required, with free food and etc. So there people just, that is a matter of livelihood, how to survive. So that time, I think companies and this oxygen cylinder issue was there, but that was also not a case of anti-competitive practice under Section 5 of the Competition Act. But anyway, it is a very interesting paper that you tried to correlate, and it will, I think, help many people to understand that yes, the health sector provider, because the you have also mentioned a particular time, COVID-19, but all the filing of applications are suspended. Now again, the question will come that when you file Limitation Act, if it has happened in the March 2020, when that application to be filed, because that specific order was there by CCI. So, but it is very interesting, and I also wish you all the very best to develop this paper and to publish this also. It will be very interesting. Thank you very much, and thank you all the
Thank you, ma'am.
participants. I think we have 4 more presentations. Thank you very much. So now we invite the next presenter to present the paper. I think Mr. Rudra, it is on SPACs.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible. Just be little louder.
Okay, ma'am. Warm greetings to the chair, co-chair, and all the panelists. I am Rudra Shandilya, and I will be presenting my paper along with my co-author Disha Chaturvedi on the topic Maneuver of SPSEs in India and Analysis. We both are students at National Law University, Visakhapatnam. So I will start the topic with introduction. Capital markets have seen remarkable accomplishments across the globe in the year 2020. The revival of special purpose acquisition companies was one of the most notable incidents in the financial market. SPSEs in the year 2021 have already raised $106 billion and counting. Nothing is more promising than the notion of an immediate and lucid fundraising in this unpredictable era of capital markets. Still, IPOs prevail over the other conventional methods of fundraising employed by the companies. In the case of an IPO, The target entity is put through a complex procedure involving strict inspection of the entity's financial statements, pitch meetings, and roadshows. This time-consuming procedure is rationalized in a SPAC route, thereby making it appealing choice for fundraising. SPAC is precisely a shell company having an inactive line of operation. It is also generally known as a blank check entity because the purpose of its establishment is to raise capital by the way of an IPO to acquire an unidentified target. Until the target is finally identified for acquisition, an escrow or a trust account is used for keeping the proceeds of the IPO. Acquisition of the target entity using such proceeds is the last step, which is known as a de-SPAC transaction. It includes negotiation of a purchase or a merger agreement by the SPAC after the identification of a potential target for acquisition. A mandatory shareholders vote is undertaken by the SPAC. The target entity and the SPAC then combine into a publicly traded and operating entity if the shareholders approve the transaction. In the other case, if any of the shareholder is not agreeing with the transaction, then he or she may redeem his shares and warrants for cash. If there is a requirement for additional funds to complete the transaction, the SPAC may take the help of a private investment in public equity deal. That is, the SPAC sells the securities to private investors. Completion of all the above mentioned steps and the de-SPAC transaction usually takes about 18 to 24 months. The SPAC route is usually preferred by tech companies and startups as they essentially favor a privately negotiated deal over others. An appealing, startup-friendly mode of raising capital is offered by the SPAC. Regulatory compliance is convenient as the listing is by the way of a merger or acquisition. Usually it's a reverse merger, by the way of a reverse merger. This route also protects the company from undertaking intense marketing. Above all, if an Indian company chooses to go for an overseas listing, it will enable the company larger access to capital along with an increase in the company's brand value. For an example, recently in February 2021, Renew Power, which is one of India's major energy entity, publicly announced the signing of a business combination agreement with RMG Acquisition Corporation 2, which is a SPAC located in the USA, in an $8 billion transaction, which will enable the merged company to get listed on Nasdaq. This is supposedly the first vital offshore listing of an Indian entity through SPAC in recent times. Now I will be discussing why SPACs are needed in capital markets. Why are they important? The main appealing benefits that SPACs have over the conventional method of IPO is to raise capital are, firstly, the ease of private equity. Venture capitalist firms and venture capitalists usually prefer SPACs over IPOs as they are flexible, cheaper, and faster at providing private equity transactions. Hence, SPAC are also sometimes termed as a poor man's equity fund. For instance, if we take deal negotiation under SPACs, they involve less number of parties, and that too, the parties are largely private ones, and which leads to an expeditious price settings. This also facilitates them in avoiding the problems of market inconsistencies or soft markets. Secondly, there are some added advantages like prima facie, the SPAC route is obscure for investors as SPACs lack any operational history. The investors are uncertain as to where their investments will be utilized. Their investment will lie in a trust account or an escrow account for 18 to 24 months, and thereafter there is a possibility that the SPAC may get dissolved, leading to an unnecessary chaos. But such events are rarely observed, as the founders and sponsors of the SPAC always choose to maintain their reputation in the market. Their nominal holdings and their decisions thereof provide them the skin in the game. Hence, targets for the acquisition are selected with due care and after extensive research. Moreover, as already discussed, the investors of SPAC always have an option to sell off their warrants and shares in an unfortunate situation. The investor may also choose to sell their shares while keeping the warrants with them. This provides them with an additional upside. For instance, if the SPAC goes better than anticipated, then these warrants can be sold off with cash. Nevertheless, the results of acquisition may sometimes be unfavorable. The SPSs depend on the sponsors and their founders to identify a simple target for acquisition, a suitable target for acquisition, and they may fail at times. For instance, in the case of Arneson versus Lewis, while the management claimed to have acted in an informed and in good faith basis for the best interest of the company, the investors submitted that the management of the company captivated them with tall promises. Moving on to the SPSEs and the Indian scenario. Firstly, the US Securities and Exchange Commissions, they define SPSE as a company with no operations that offers securities for cash and places substantially all the offering proceeds into a trust or escrow account for future use in the acquisition of one or more private operating companies. Now, in Indian scenario, in an advisory opinion to the MCA, the SEBI proposed the definition of shell entities as entities having no significant operational assets or business activity of its own, and those companies are acting in a pass-through capacity as a conduit. This is where it creates a problem. The definition proposed by SEBI is tilted towards regulating entities that are facing financial inconsistencies. Therefore, the said definition may practically exclude SPSEs as they usually have sufficient funds with them. However, the definition proposed by SEC, US SEC, could be introduced with some suitable changes in India. The term securities has been defined widely under Section 2, subclause S of the Securities Contract Regulation Act, and the said term also include any instrument so declared under Section 2, Clause 81 of Companies Act 2013. Hence, SPSE route seems to be viable in the Indian capital market, but the major problem lies with certain laws and requirements that I will be discussing now. Let us start with Companies Act 2013. There is a need to shield SPSEs against the action of government agencies as they are essentially shell companies. Since SPSE is established only for raising capital to acquire the target entity, the promoters, directors can be penalized for non-compliances. Moreover, its name could also be removed from the register of companies as according to Section 248 of the Companies Act 2013. A company can be deregistered by the registrar if it has failed to commence its business within 1 year of its incorporation. As previously discussed, SPSE usually takes 18 to 24 months to commence its business by identifying and completing a merger with the target company. To maximize their shareholders' wealth and to maximize their objective by identifying the best target, this timeline is necessary for the founders and sponsors of the SPSE. Therefore, the aforesaid section may act as a significant hurdle for SPSEs in India. Such problems, however, could be easily solved if the SPSEs are provided exemptions. Now, Indian Stock Exchange requirements and the SEBI Icdr Regulations 2018. According to Regulation 6, Clause 1 of SEBI Icdr Regulations 2018, an issuer should comply with the following criteria to be eligible to make an IPO. In each of the preceding 3 years, the issuer shall have net tangible assets of minimum 3 crore rupees or minimum 15 crore rupees as the average operating profit and minimum 1 crore rupees as their net worth. Nevertheless, if the company does not satisfy the above mentioned criteria under 6 subclause 1, it can get itself listed upon compliance with the alternate criteria mentioned under Regulation 6 clause 2 of the SEBI Icdr regulations. Companies like Zomato.
Mr. Rudra, why have you mentioned Icdr Regulation 2018?
Ma'am, to get itself listed on stock exchanges, ma'am.
No.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. Sorry.
2018 Icdr Regulation 2018. Is it for a listing?
No, ma'am. Ma'am, it provides the criteria under 6 subclause 1 and 6 subclause 2 for the issuer to get listed. Matlab, they provide
criteria of the issuer.
Yes, ma'am. The eligibility criteria of the issuer.
Okay. Please proceed.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, companies like Companies like Zomato and Paytm, which were not having operating profit in preceding years, got listed through this regulation under Section 6, Clause 2. Talking about SPACs, a SPAC may fall short of compliance under Regulation 6 subclause 1, but it can still get itself listed through Regulation 6 clause 2. Further, if a SPAC has to meet the requirement of this regulation, the qualified institutional buyers should be allocated a minimum 75% of the net offer, and the issues should be made through a book building process. The said conditions may seem to be unviable, but are in fact beneficial for the privately negotiated SPAC transactions. In the ever-changing Indian market, such conditions ensure a huge inflow of funds. In addition to the SEBI Icdr regulations, it is also mandatory for the companies to comply with the listing regulations of the Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange. For example, to get listed on NSE, it is mandatory for a company to produce a track record of at least 3 years of either the promoter company incorporated or the company seeking listing. Moreover, under Section 4, Clause 1, Subclause C of the Companies Act 2013, a company is required to list its core business objective in its Memorandum of Association. But SPAC, being a sale company, would fall short of these prerequisite conditions of having an established running business with recognizable objectives. A SPAC has only one identifiable business objective which can be seen, that is to acquire another company to make it public. There was possibility to define SPAC's objects through the other objects clause as found in the erstwhile Companies Act of 1956, but the said clause has been discontinued from the Companies Act 2013. Now moving on to the takeover regulations. The SEBI substantial acquisition of shares and takeovers regulation applies only to public companies and hence exclude the target companies of SPAC, which are mostly private, from its ambit. Further, it does not have any provision specific to the de-SPAC transaction, which means it would apply equally if a SPAC acquires a public company and a company like Tata acquires a public company. Therefore, there is a need to amend the said regulations accordingly. In 2020, the MCA, however, notified sections 230 clause 11 and 230 clause 2 of the Companies Act 2013 pertaining to the takeover of unlisted companies by majority shareholders. The MCA further notified Rule 3 clause 5 in order to operationalize these said provisions. Owing to this, a group of shareholder holding 75% of the total shares in the unlisted company get the right to acquire the remaining minority shareholding. Thus, it appears that these provisions intends to operate as a squeeze out of the minority shareholders. Moreover, such a scheme would require necessary permission from the NCLT. Hence, it is unclear as to whether these provisions would apply properly in cases in SPAC-like acquisitions. SPAC aspects related to the stamp duty can also not be ignored in this case. The levy of stamp duty on a scheme of merger is a major regulatory hurdle for the de-SPAC transaction in India. The scheme affecting merger is leviable to stamp duty as it is an instrument as per the judgment pronounced in the case of Hindustan Lever Limited versus State of Maharashtra by the Supreme Court of India. As noted earlier, the de-SPAC transaction is usually by way of reverse merger. Hence, in order to comply with the Companies Act 2013, a scheme of merger has to be approved by NCLT. This attracts stamp duty, which increases the cost of transaction rapidly. Moreover, RBI and the FEMA regulations are worth discussing. Several RBI regulations would be attracted in case of cross-border de-SPAC transaction. For instance, the Foreign Exchange Management Cross-Border Merger Regulations 2018. Additionally, in the case of an outbound merger, the de-SPAC transaction can also be saved as a share swap between the shareholders of the Indian company and SPAC. However, the target entity in India should first have a foreign holding entity to employ such an alternative, which is not ordinarily observed. This process might also require acceptance from the NCLT and RBI. Further, the maximum foreign shareholding in a SPAC cannot be determined as the company does not have a specific business object and a fixed sector. Moreover, for cross-border mergers, there are thorough reporting requirements prescribed by RBI. This can further elongate the time required to complete the de-SPAC transaction. Apart from all the above mentioned laws and requirements, a potential antitrust threat associated with SPSEs is that they can be used for the purpose of nascent or killer acquisitions by the big players. Since SPSEs generally acquire new and budding startups, the companies having dominant position in the market may use SPAC as a tool to terminate their competition. I will now discuss the recent developments along with the concluding note. The International Financial Service Center Authority has recently issued a consultation paper providing for listing of SPACs in the International Financial Service Center in Gift City, Gandhinagar. The base application size in an SPAC IPO is kept at $250,000 and at least 20% of the post-issue paid-up capital is prescribed to be the minimum sponsor's contribution. The problem with the said development is that IFSC in India is still a fledgling platform for raising capital. When compared with BSE and NSE, the access of capital that IFSC provides is certainly very less. Nevertheless, listing of SPSEs at the IFSC is a commendable step for the capital market. SPSE listing on the respective stock exchanges of Singapore and Hong Kong and recently Egypt are also being expected by the end of year 2021. Whereas countries such as USA, Canada, and Australia have also seen many SPSE listings till date, as their regulatory framework already allow for such listings. And Indian entities such as Yatra, Online, Videocon D2H, and now Renew Power have already been listed on Nasdaq through the SPSE route. SPSEs obviously have an edge over the conventional modes of fundraising, and hence SEBI has already formed a group of experts to examine and determine the viability of introducing SPSEs with adequate checks and balances in India. Further, SEBI has also recently revised the framework of Innovators Growth Platform under the SEBI Icdr regulations. The IGP, or the Innovators Growth Platform, aims to address capital requirements of entities by introducing a separate exchange with eased out framework than the regular exchange. It would be worth watching now whether the startups in India choose IGP or SPSE as a mode to get listed. Hence, from the above discussions, it can be concluded that while the current regulatory scenario of India does not nullify the option of SPSE listing and de-SPAC transaction, there is a requirement for certain changes in the regulatory arrangement of India to allow listing of SPSEs in India. After analyzing the current Indian regulatory framework, the author opines that essential amendments to the Stamp Act, SEBI regulations, and the RBI guidelines, along with the introduction of particular SEBI regulations pertaining to listing of SPSEs, shall make the SPSE dream legally and financially feasible. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Rudra, for such a very new topic and emerging area from the business law point of view. So now the floor is open for questions. Any question?
Can I ask? I'm also not sure what I'm asking, but still I want to attempt. Can I make some comment?
Sir, please, please.
First of all, Rudra, I think you touched a new instrument for the startup and emerging startup for raising fund. And also you mentioned that already the alternative SEBI has provided. I was wondering, when you compare with Nasdaq stock, comparing with Nasdaq, though it's not comparison, but still Nasdaq in context of the Indian BSE and NSE. How far because startups required funds, but not as huge as what we see in the context of what the larger corporations and companies do raise funds through IPO and other way. So how far you first of all, you provide platform for raising money, that is fine. And if suppose you get like shareholders, maybe public, maybe possibly assuming, though you said that it will be not only for public, but it may be they can raise from the uh, other venture capitalists. It's maybe more way of transparent way of raising money rather than the way right now the system is happening, and they get funding and that. But only the what I was thinking that the number of startups which are coming in India are in significant number, but how far they get succeed, that is also question, and their success uh, uh, get, if you just check it from the data point of view, they don't even sustain within a year also. So raising money and then not ultimately getting anything to the other way around, what far the system may get benefit. Though there is a problem in corporation also, it's not like that. That's why we do have streamlined IBC to take care if something happen. So what is your take on that? And you do have told the hostile part, but I feel that uh, it's for the both buyer point, who is investing and who are asking also, and who are the regulator also. They are also not aware about the exact the maybe success rate or what, because otherwise government is providing them funding and that you can see various fundings are there from the MSME and others, the ministry which do provide the funding. So why this one thing? And it's very costly if you see cost benefit point of view.
Yes, sir. So I agree that the startups don't even succeed for 1 year or 2 years somehow. And even the startups, when they get listed on stock exchanges, like recently we have seen the example of Paytm. Paytm was not a profit-making entity, but it still got listed according to 6 clause 2 of the SEBI Icdr regulation. But the investors and all the shareholders, whoever bought the IPO and subscribed the IPO, they had many intentions from the Paytm's IPO. But on the very first day of its listing, the shares of the Paytm dropped down to around 18 to 19%. So this is where SPSC's roles come into picture. For instance, SPSCs are already listed company, and any shareholder can get warrants in addition to these shares in an SPSC. So the shareholder have more benefit as they can as when the SPSC decide that whether to buy or buy any identified target, then the shareholders mandatory vote is taken before buying the buying any SPS before buying any private entity to make it public entity. So here the shareholders get benefit, as if one or two shareholder of if a certain amount of shareholder, they are not getting proper values, like if they are thinking that this company will not be profitable in future, or this company will not get profit in the future, then they can sell their shares while keeping the warrants with them. So these warrants provide an additional upside. Like if they sell their shares and after 2 years or 3 years of getting listed, the company which have been made now public by the SPSC makes profit and goes better than anticipated, then these warrants can also be redeemed for cash by the rate of that by the market price, which is during that time after 2 years or after 3 years. This is what they provided. And anyways, SPSC route is generally as SPSCs determine which company to acquire or which company not to acquire, and the startups which have not been getting investment by the private equity funds or by the venture capitalists, SPSC or the management or the founder of the SPSC will never choose any startup which is not going to make profit in the future. They take decision after a mandatory vote of all the shareholders and after a deep market research. And sir, for startups, like for any startup which is not very profitable or which is not in existence since many years, SEBI has released Innovators Growth Platform or IGP for them, sir. IGP is basically a platform in addition to NSE and BSE, which is only for budding startups like these, which are not many profitable. So it's the risk of the market and the shareholders who are investing in them. They have to decide whether to invest in SPSE or into IGP.
And you also mentioned that in GIFT and this international stock exchange, yeah, the BSE INX, they also have proposed the SPAC. So
Yes, sir. They do have proposed SPACs, but the SEBI has now formed a group of committee members to examine the viability of introducing SPACs in national stock exchanges and in GIFT City. And it is only in a consultation form. They are demanding consultation from the general public with regard to that. They have not finalized any rule. They have just released a draft consultation paper for that. And after the SEBI's committee will determine everything, then so it is.
Mr. Rudra, I think there is a question. Why is it called poor man's equity?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, it is called poor man's equity because first SPSE gets listed on their respective stock exchanges, and the SPSE raised their IPO. So that IPO is very less in cost, and anyone can buy that IPO. So basically, it is called poor man's equity because the SPSE promises that after 18 or 24 months, when they will acquire the private company to make it public, then the IPO on which the shareholders subscribed initially, they will get a profit of 10 to 20 times more after the acquisition of the target has been done. And initially the IPO is of very less price, and anyone can buy, and not only the proper shareholders or the proper investors can buy. That's why it is known as poor man's equity fund. It is a term given by Donald Trump and New York Times in USA. Donald Trump also has a SPSE, so basically he uses these terms to their shareholders.
So, any other question? So it was a very interesting paper because SPSE, as you said that SEBI also, both SEBI and IFSCA, they have already declared that they are also thinking for this SPAC, and also the consultation paper which you said SEBI, is that applicable to IFSCA?
Ma'am, IFSC has released the consultation paper, and after the consultation paper, SEBI has formed a group of committee to examine the viability.
So IFSC, there is a consultation paper.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you gone through that?
Yes, ma'am, I have gone through that, ma'am. I've also mentioned, ma'am, the source in my paper, ma'am.
Achha.
The direct source, yes.
But there is one regulation in IFSCA that International Financial Services Centers Authority, Issuance and Listing of Securities Regulation. There they have referred to SPAC, SPSE, and
Yes,
I think that is just to listing and all these SEBI rules which are already there. There are some explanation also it is applicable. But can you just tell the title of that consultation paper?
yes, ma'am. Ma'am, it is the consultation paper on the proposed IFSCA Issuance and Listing of Securities Regulations 2021.
The same that I said already.
Yes, ma'am.
The
Yes, ma'am.
SPC is referred in that regulation. And,
Yes, ma'am.
some regulations of SEBI also will be referred for that. But the what you have referred this stamp duty, takeover code, Icdr regulation, and the FEMA. So the changes, but how is SPC will be incorporated in India? That is the first question.
Yes, ma'am.
You
Ma'am,
uh,
yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I have mentioned all those rules and regulations, ma'am. Like if an SPSC has to get listed on BSE and NSE and not on IFSC, then these all regulations are to be taken care of. Like, ma'am, in Companies Act, sale companies are being shut down by Modi government after it came into power. All the sale companies are being identified and these are shut down. And takeover regulation, ma'am, there are certain amendments that are needed in all the regulations, like the FEMA regulation or the SEBI ICDR regulations to get SPSE listed on NSE or BSE. And if it is going to be listed on IFSC, then ma'am, it's a separate thing, and IFSC is still in developing phase, ma'am. Law firms, several law firms like Xiii, Amarchand Mangaldas and different law firms are now establishing their chambers in Gift City, Gandhinagar. They are all only doing it, ma'am, because they are seeing the potential that in future IFSC can also be the investment hub in India. Currently, BSE and NSE are the only investment hubs which we can see or which we can foresee for startups or for any company to get listed through an IPO, man. Recently, there are tons of IPOs getting listed on BSEs and NSE, ma'am, like Nika, Paytm, Zomato, etc.
any other question? Because
Rudra, I have posted a question for you. Please see if you would like to answer it.
yeah.
Okay, will this not shift the risk of business to the poor given the volatility of equity markets? I guess, ma'am, it won't shift the risk of business to the poor, since if in SPSC you don't only get shares, you also get warrants in addition to the shares. So if you assume or if you think that the shares will not go upside or it will not be profitable, then you can sell off the shares at any price. And anyway, the shares are at at very low price when it is in the initial phase. And if it goes better than anticipated, then you already have the warrants. Warrants are basically, if in layman's language I speak, then warrants are basically an gift provided by the SPSC to their shareholders. The shareholders only pay for the shares, but they get warrants as a gift, as an addition to their shares. And that's the point why it is known as poor man's equity fund, because it comparatively reduces the risk, because in NSE and BSE you only have shares, and if it goes better you make profit, if it does not get better you make loss. But in SPSE, if it goes better, then you have the warrants. If it does not get better, then you can sell off the shares at any time and you still have the warrants with you.
What is the proportion of the warrant versus equity value?
That SPSC decides. It is just like dividend. Like the company board of directors, they decide what amount of dividend is given to the shareholder. That is related. That is also the case in SPSC. The directors decide or the founders decide which proportion is given to which shareholder.
Is it not whole new
Mr.
portal?
Rudra, I would really ask you to follow this development, for some time and watch the performance, and then maybe you can write a paper on that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rudra. And let's see how SPSC will work in India, because the SEBI, all discussions are going on, and it is a very early, we are in a very early stage rather. So let's see how SPSC will work in India. Thank you very much. I think we'll move to the next presenter.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think Tino Joseph. I invite Tino Joseph to present the paper on gold policies in India in relation to consumer demand.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
The respected chair, Professor Dr. Mamta Biswal, Dean and Professor of Law, Gujarat National University, Co-Chair Dr. Hitesh Thakur, Assistant Professor GNLU, and Ms. Shanti Samanda, Assistant Professor of Tamil Nadu National University, Tamil Nadu National Law University, Mrs. Yashoda, our student volunteer for this program. Good evening to all. And the topic I would be discussing here is regarding the gold policies in India in related to consumer demand. So I'll just share these slides. So gold policies in India in relation to the consumer demand. Is the slide is visible? Ma'am, is it visible, ma'am?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just start with some of the importance of the gold and just coming to the after that I'll be coming to the research problem, and I'll be dealing with some of the major committees, government committees that dealt with gold, and also the government schemes and acts that were especially dedicated to the gold. So also it's a small analysis on the gold demand, just tried for that, and gold analysis based on these policy periods. So regarding the importance of gold, so from the colonialization periods itself, gold was considered, the accumulation of wealth was a major motive behind the colonizations. Gold, you can say Christopher Columbus has said that gold is a treasure. Who is having the gold, he possesses, he succeeds, he can fulfill his all his wishes, and he succeeds in helping the souls into paradise. And it means that is gold. We are getting some freedom and benefit from this gold. So and gold is there is no nationality to the gold. So everywhere it's acceptable, and it is universally accepted and unaltered fiduciary value per excellence. Icle was one of the former French president, and some others also. JP Morgan, the financial leader, global financial leader, he said that the gold and silver are money, everything else is credit, because gold is the underlying asset to make money. And coming to the economist, we can see that classical economists like David Ricardo, how the value of gold is determined. Value of gold is the intrinsic value, which is depending upon scarcity. Gold is scarce in its supply, and the quantity of labor bestowed in procuring them, and the value of capital employed in the mines to produce them decides the value of gold. And Karl Marx is said that although gold and silver are not by nature of money, but money is by nature of gold and silver, because the physical property of manifestation of value of commodities and divisibility, this character is coming from gold. And but the John Maynard Keynes was not in favor of the gold. He has associated gold with the underdevelopment. So gold is a relic from the time when the governments were less trustworthy in matters such as currency debasement than they are. Also done some of the literature reviews on gold, and why this, from where this demand is coming from. So especially you can see that gold is taken as a hedge against inflation, because the domestic price of gold is the dollar price of gold in the international market multiplied by the exchange rate with minor adjustments for local taxes and duties. So domestic price is determined by the international prices of gold in the market, right? And so the gold price also usually increase with it. So a gold acts as a proper hedge against currency and depreciation. Also, gold is considered as one of the hedge against exchange rate hedge. So exchange value of US dollar was an important factor in fluctuations in gold prices in India. So there is a bi-directional causality between the exchange rate of US dollars and gold price in India before the recessions. And you can see that with the gold demand, especially comes from the jewelry demand for gold, because there is a cultural tradition and rural commitment is there to spare the to gold jewelry, especially among the women folks. And there is a lack of social security net makes the family a sense of financial insecurity led to the continuous occurring of gold. And it is considered as a resource for the women. The Pravina Kodoth and N. Madhavan Kuti did a study, and in that they found that it's a dowry affair, where the places where the dowry is more, especially in the southern states in India, even Kerala, the gold is a dowry affair. The gold demand is found to be very high. And gold is also as a collateral instrument of credit, because there is a n number of loan market. There is a vast, huge loan market in the gold loan market. The coverage of gold loans was more prominent among relatively poor households and financially excluded ones. Ease of taking loans at the time of emergency and ease of payments to repay, and it is considered as a last resort of credit among different classes of the people. So this was the trend of gold demand in India. I had taken data from 1970 to 2018. You can see an upward trend of gold, and the gold demand shoots up, especially after the liberalization eras, and it has reached the highest level of 1,078 tons in 2011. And we can see these are the major gold demanding countries in the world. Especially you can see that China and India constitute the more than 50% of the gold demand in the world itself. These two countries, 53%. Other countries like US is having only 5% gold demand, Germany 3%, like that. So China and India, we can take these two countries especially, and given the research problem as why this there is a the non-monetary gold was always seen as a burden of the balance of payments in India. Initially, the government tried to control the gold demand through restrictive gold policies. So you can see that this is a graph on gold as a percentage of the total imports in India. Even 2011, it's a 13% of our imports were constituted as gold itself, and even currently around about 7% of total imports is gold imports. So government has tried to control the gold demand through restrictive trade policies. Then from time to time, Government of India introduced various schemes to attract the households to unveil the holding gold among the households through disclosure schemes. My question is regarding is the gold policies were effective in curtailing the gold demand? And our objectives are regarding the nature of analyzing the nature of gold demand in India, analyzing the role of different committees to frame the gold policies in India, and critically evaluate the different gold schemes in India. So I've taken the databases, basically use the Indian economy database by Reserve Bank of India, Economic Survey of Ministry of Finance, Exim Bank Data Bank, that is from the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and the World Gold Council data. So we can see this is a total world demand for gold, jewelry demand for gold. In India, constitutes about 27% of the total jewelry demand for gold in the world itself, and China is 31%. We can see this, the world itself, India is having 79, whatever we have imported about 760 tons of gold in the year 2018. Out of that 79%, about 80% of the gold was for the making the jewelry demand. It was the jewelry demand for gold, and investment demand was only 21%. The world average is only 67%, and even China is using it only 69% of its imports for jewelries. So we can see that the jewelry demand is a major portion of the gold demand in India. And we know that about more than 90%, we are just producing about 1.5 tons of the gold only. So here you can see 760 tons. So most of the gold and more than 90% of the gold is imported only. So major committees, I'll just mention a few committees about that mentioned about the gold. In 1993, the Advisory Committee on the National Accounts, that is System of National Accounts, 93, they identified 3 types of gold. That is gold owned by the monetary authorities as part of the international reserves, gold held as store of value, and gold used for industrial purposes. So the gold jewelry purchased in small units by households, they are considered as a consumption expenditure, but the gold purchased by institutions as store of value is treated as gross capital formations. And in 1996, expert group on savings and capital formation headed by the Raja Chillaya committee, there was the change in non-monetary gold due to additional production or imports may be treated as final consumption if the gold is converted into jewelry of low value denominations. So otherwise, it's a store of value by institutions. It can be treated as a capital formation. And in 1997, this committee on capital account convertibility, they recommended that to the sale of gold by banks and financial institutions to liberalize the import of gold by all entities and establish an interbank spot cash market in gold to activate interbank borrowing and lending of gold, and gold deposit schemes to be promoted, and also recommended a launching of gold exchange traded funds by mutual funds. And there should be a facility to store gold in demat form. Demat form gold was also introduced. They were recommended by this Takeover committee in 1997. Now we know that mutual funds, gold ETFs are there, and these gold deposit schemes are also there. So in 2009, a high-level committee on estimation of savings and investment, they had given the harmonized code for this gold, this 7108 and 7114. By using these codes, we'll be able to analyze the gold demand, gold import data from the Exim Bank database. And in 2017, the committee to transform India's gold demand, this is especially the concentrated on gold only, this committee. Gold demand, transform India's gold demand under the chairmanship of Mr. Radhan P. Wadal. He was a principal advisor to Niti Aayog. So here, this committee recommended to boost the gold exports and increase the value addition. Hallmarking should be made mandatory in a phased manner. This hallmarking is the last date for hallmarking is now the November 30, 2021. And gold metal loan may be considered in terms of weight for gold, and more bank branches to accept gold deposit under gold monetization schemes. There should be an effort to reform the gold monetization scheme should be more attractive to the investors, and introduction of the new gold savings account which accepts the Indian national rupees and gold. They also proposed a gold board of India. This gold board of India, actually this was sanctioned by the finance ministry, but it is still under the consideration of PMO office. And we can see what are the gold policies that are adopted by Indian government, gold policies. So these policies, we can see I had put forward categories as restrictive policies, liberalized policies, and controlled gold policies, and contemporary gold policies. Restrictive gold policies, all of you maybe about the FARA Act. FARA Act is one of the FARA Act in 1947. So this act, there was a complete ban on gold exports and imports during this time. The act regulated certain payments, dealings in foreign exchange and securities, and import and export of currency and bullion, including gold. So because at this time, the major objective was to conserve the gold what we are having, this 1947. And there was a Gold Control Act in 1962. This act recalled all gold loans and banned forward trading in gold. The act also prohibited the manufacturing of gold jewelry above 14 karat. So this act, Gold Control Act, it has banned all the gold manufacturing of gold jewelry above 14 carat. So this has led to the protest by the goldsmiths all over India, right? As a result of the protest, then came 1968. They were allowed to, given the provisions to goldsmiths to manufacture ornaments of any purity of gold by 1968. But in 1968 Gold Control Act, it prohibited the citizens from owning gold in the form of bars and coins. It prohibited. And there was a gold bond scheme in 1965 to mobilize the idle gold of households. And coming to the liberalization policies, this NRI schemes, non-residential Indian schemes in 1992, which allowed the non-resident Indians to bring gold up to 5 kg with a customs duty of 10 to 15%. And also the special import license schemes in 1994, import of gold by passenger regulations, and 1994 also allowed NRIs to bring 5 kg of gold to India. And also an open general license scheme in 1997. These gold items, especially the powder gold, was allowed under the open general license for few institutions and 8 commercial banks. And coming to the controlled gold policies, these are the voluntary disclosure schemes. It was in 1951, 65, 75, 85, 91, 97, and 2016. It aimed at disclosing the unaccounted wealth, including gold, by paying a penalty of around 40 to 60% of your wealth. So this was making the black to white money. So, and coming to the gold metal loan schemes in 1998, it authorized the banks the banks were allowed to import gold and extended gold loans to importers and exporters. And gold deposit scheme is in 1999. It aimed to utilize the idle gold and give a return to gold owners. It also accepted the scrap gold. And this gold scheme, 80-20 gold schemes in 2013, the scheme were mandatory for gold traders to export 20% of whatever you imports, you should, 20% of whatever your gold imports should be exported. That was a condition for this scheme. Gold schemes. Now coming to the contemporary gold schemes, all of you must be familiar with the contemporary gold schemes, because of gold monetization scheme is a gold monetization scheme, sovereign gold bond schemes, and India gold coin schemes. These gold monetization schemes, it was a combination of a revamped gold deposit scheme and a revamped gold metal loan schemes. The depositors can open a gold deposit account at the designated banks prior to tendering the gold at the collection and purity testing centers. The banks will credit the gold deposit with the amount of 995 finest gold as advice received from the CPTC. On maturity of the schemes, the depositors were allowed to take options of return gold with interest in the form of gold bars or in the form of cash. These schemes where they can deposit either for the short term, medium term, or long term, right? So for 3 to 5 years deposits, the rate of interest was 2.25%, and for more than 5 years, it was 2.50%. And this gold coin scheme was part of the gold monetization schemes. The banks accept the deposits from public for minting gold coins. The coins are of 24 karat purity and 999 fineness, and these are available to the public from these MMTC outlets under the designated bank branches. And there's also GMS linked gold metal loan schemes. The gold mobilized under short-term bank deposits may be provided to the jewelers as a GMI. The jewelers will receive the physical delivery of gold either from refineries or designated banks. So I just taken the data of the prohibition policy as 1972 to 1989. So there was a reduction in the.
Sir, can you come to the conclusion and suggestion?
Yeah,
I think
yes.
the time is up. In 1 minute, you can conclude.
Yes, ma'am. Coming. So just you can see this prohibition policies. It's straight away there is a reduction in the gold demand during the prohibition policy period exactly up to 1982. After that, it increased. Gold demand increased, and the liberalization policies. You can see a straight forward marching of curve that shows a high demand during the demand for the gold during liberalization periods and the gold demand during the contemporary periods. You can see a almost flat curve, but it's double the demand. So these were. I think time is up. Means I'll just go to straight away to this conclusions. So concluding remarks, during the years of after independence, India followed very restrictive and prohibitive policies towards the gold consumption. The liberalization policy on gold adopted during 1990s led to a large-scale annual growth of gold. That is about 18% increase of gold demand during 1990 to 1998 period. Thereafter, the government resorted to more controlled gold policies to reduce the burden of gold imports. So you can see here straight away the 18% CAGR was there during the liberalization policies, and during restrictive periods and prohibiting periods, average gold demand was 90 tons, 90 and 94. You can see 90 to 98, 414 tons was average. But in controlled gold policies also increased, but the growth rate was only 4% was there. So this is concluding remarks. The controlled gold policies during 1999 to 2014 and contemporary policies during 2015 to 18 were largely stressed on unleashing the household gold to banks or designated agency through gold deposit schemes. These schemes were not as successful as expected due to various reasons, especially the lower rate of interest and exclusion of jewelry cost, making in compensation for gold deposits. The reduction in annual growth rates shows the government policies do have an impact on controlling the gold demand growth in the country, especially in the prohibitory gold law periods. The analytical results reveals that prohibition policy was effective only at the initial periods, and control policy failed to yield a sudden result in controlling the gold demand in the country. The GNP per capita and the gold price found to have positive influence on gold demand in India. Apart from because I had done this simple regression on the GNP per capita and international gold price. So the result shows that it is having a positive effect on during the prohibition policy period as well as, but it was not statistically significant for the controlled gold period. So this is the government, the GNP per capita and gold price found to have a positive influence on gold demand in India. Apart from these, various cultural and portfolio-related preferences for gold are deeply rooted in the Indian society. The government policies would be successful in controlling the gold demand only if the alternative suggested by the government would have a role to the gold to the households. Gold, because gold is an instrument of high intrinsic value and transaction cost is very less during the emergency lending. A well financial settlement of households may lead to reduce the dependence of gold as an emergency asset, but they may increase the consumption of gold as a cultural asset. The only way, this is just a suggestion, the only way to reduce the consumption of gold is to adopt stringent rules that limits the holding of gold among households, control the use of gold in cultural festivals as well as religious institutions by providing alternatives or strictly promoting electronic gold as donations, or more awareness of gold financial products and earning trust of the public by providing subsidies on interest on lending through financial products. So I would thank for providing this wonderful opportunity. I would also like to thank the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor V.S. Elizabeth, and the organizing committee convener, Dr. K. Thomas Phillips. Thanks for hearing me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Joseph. It was really very interesting because you have done a very good research comparing the policies. And because of shortage of time, just we'll have few questions and we'll just conclude. In any question, please, the floor is open for questions.
Can I ask, Madam, one question?
Please.
Sir, first of all, a wonderful presentation with regard to the how policy intervention make a difference. So whether your conclusion is that the policy intervention was not efficient with regard to goal, that's what you want to make a conclusion, ultimate conclusion?
No, sir. Actually, the policy, prohibitory policy was very effective during the initial periods of time. But afterwards, it started not effective because of various reasons. Various reasons. Especially even one reason is that if we are restricting more the gold demand, one thing is that the illegal smuggling of gold will increase. Illegal smuggling is increasing. That is one of the reasons, and the government will lose. Government loses this taxes, either the customs tax and especially the taxes from the sale of gold. So this is this restrictive policy, very much restrictive policy is not effective for gold in India because of a huge demand for gold in India, and we are producing only, I say that only more less than 2% of total demand. That means majority of our gold is coming from abroad. That is why the policy is.
That means any means if gold is restricted, people may go with the unaccounted gold, black through other route they will purchase, because of you also mentioned about culture and other way. We are so much rooted with regard to gold. Even you said about in with you can in your I think we go to the place and we also put ritual purpose also use a gold only. So there is nothing to. But I was just wondering one thing. Once you also mentioned that there are alternative products there, like you said about the gold sovereign bond. Also, you mentioned about the gold ETF. Despite of such a legitimate the instrument, which are virtual in nature and very safe compared to putting gold at house, do you think because of that that result may be shown like that otherwise what you have got like? Don't you think you have now alternative gold, virtual gold and other things you are having? Maybe sovereign bond, there may be ETF gold and that. And other than forget about the gold, nowadays you have various other instrument also if you put it. If you think gold as an asset. So you have various other instrument to keep. So that may be reason we are irrespective of policy intervention.
Yes, sir. Actually, the people are investing on gold. That is the investment. It is not the investment demand, actually, investment demand, but the jewelry demand for gold is more in India. Jewelry demand, public display is there. That is one of the things. Jewelry demand is much more than the investment demand. If just we want investment demand means we can go for this gold bars or gold electronic gold and all. But it is mainly the jewelry demand for gold that drives the gold demand in India. So we need something that I mean we have to be some affirmative policies or some policies that gives more awareness to the people regarding this. Public displays, especially in the southern states, more. That is one.
You told about this Tarapura committee recommendation that the capital account convertibility. So mostly what is happening nowadays, people are going to abroad and they are purchasing, they can't purchase gold, but they can bring back the jewelries and that, irrespective of sometime whatever the limited one household can do. So other mode also gold is coming, which is not it is taxed, it is not been as taxed, it must to be like. So that may be not be calculated when you are mentioning with regard to what maybe have happened when you are allowing permission to go to abroad and you can purchase not gold but you can purchase the jewelries. So
Yes, sir.
in that way, you're not demanding your own jeweler as so, but you are giving benefit to other way around in other way. That is also there.
Yes, sir. That aspect is not because we don't have data for that. That is one aspect. I had taken the data from this government websites only. Then a primary level study would be much more interesting in this gold demands. If we are conducting a primary level study, especially among the households in southern states, that would be much interesting.
Any question from the participants? Okay, anyway, we are running shortage of time. So I have one point because you have dealt with the policies from the beginning, and can you just throw some light on the current position with regard to the gold policies? Is there any development?
Yeah, ma'am. It's developments. I said that there is a gold board is there. Gold board was accepted by the government. By the finance ministry has given this permission to go forward for the gold bond, gold board especially. But it is still under the consideration of a prime minister's office. That is one thing. And second is RBI has revised currently because this gold deposit schemes that are not able to become attractive to the households because the interest rate is very less, only 2.25% and 2.50, and the cost of making your gold into this you have to test the quality of the gold. That is costly and time taking, and banks will accept there is a cost is there with the this. So RBI is constantly revising these gold monetization schemes currently. That is there, and gold board is coming, and also this hallmarking of the all the jewelries, gold jewelries held by the households, not really households, but to be sold by the shop owners, gold jewelers. Hallmarking, the last date is November 30, 2021. I don't know, maybe because of COVID, government may extend the dates like that.
That is there, but you can check some development, Ministry of Finance, the International Bullion Exchange. I think this now this IFSC that Rudra was discussing about SPAC. Now the work is started on gold exchange.
Okay.
I think now it all will import all the gold to India will be imported through that exchange only. So I think it is under process. You can check that. I
Sure,
don't know the exact status, but 3 months back there was a pilot project for this bullion exchange. So just you see, I think your research question may be answered partially.
Okay, thank you. I'll surely check. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now I invite the next speaker. Valentin to present the paper on block holders at the gate, a survey of primacy, anatomy, incentives, and governance of large shareholders.
Thank you very much. Let me just try to share my screen. So does it work? Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see it is very clear. Please proceed.
Thank you. So many thanks for this kind introduction, and thank you very much for having me. The paper I would like to present today is entitled Block Holders at the Gate. It is basically an interdisciplinary survey about primacy, anatomy, incentives, and governance of large shareholders. So let me please give you a short overview of my talk. As many of you have already noticed, the title of my presentation is inspired by the classic business thriller Barbarians at the Gate on the fall of RJR Nabisco, a best-selling book that was later made into a television movie. Both the book and the movie are based on a series of articles written by investigative journalists Brian Borrow and John Haylar for the Wall Street Journal, describing the battle for the control of RJR Nabisco, an American conglomerate selling tobacco and food products in the autumn of 1988. So at the time, the RJR Nabisco leveraged buyout was widely considered to be the preeminent example of corporate greed and executive greed. In my talk, I will explain what this has to do with large shareholders, so-called blockholders. So first, I will talk about the rise of a new paradigm in corporate governance. From a theoretical perspective, this is what I call blockholder primacy. Second, I will provide a few insights on the statistical distribution of blockholders across time and space. From an empirical perspective, this is what I call blockholder anatomy. Third, I will focus on the costs and the benefits of voice and exit strategies of different blockholders. And from an economic perspective, this is what I call blockholder incentives. Fourth, I will elaborate on the regulatory framework of membership and market participation. And from a legal perspective, this is what I call blockholder governance. So let's get started with the theoretical part on blockholder primacy. Whom should the corporation serve? Should shareholders come first? Or should companies serve also their employees, customers, and society at large? And does it at all make a difference whether such actors operate on a short-term or on a long-term horizon? From a comparative perspective, so I use a space dimension here, I think that a total of 4 different models can be distinguished. One main approach concerns shareholder value. The neoclassical model of shareholder value is mostly a creature of economic theory. But even today, it is widely recognized in the state law of the United States. However, there are also variations of a shareholder model. For example, the concept of enlightened shareholder value, as enshrined in Section 172 of the British Companies Act of 2006. So the basic idea here is long-term value creation. And Switzerland, for example, also follows that path. The other approach concerns stakeholder theory. Germany and France, for example, pioneered this model, giving labor a voice through the introduction of a system of employee representation on the supervisory board of a company. In German-speaking countries, the normative critical stakeholder model, which has its origins in the management literature, is quite popular. This model can also be found in international standards such as the UN Global Compact, for example. So who controls the corporation? Is it the management team or around the chief executive? Or is it maybe the board of directors and the chairman or the chairwoman? If not, are all shareholders in the driver's seat, or eventually only a subgroup of them, notably large shareholders, that is the blockholders? And from a historical perspective, so I use a time dimension here for this analysis, I think that 4 different paradigms must be distinguished. The 20th century was mainly dominated by agent-based models. In the first half of the 20th century, scholarship and practice was largely driven by the idea that executive management was in charge of running the business. The underlying school of thought is, of course, managerialism, mainly represented by management scholars such as Drucker or Chandler. Then, towards the end of the 20th century, it was generally the idea that the supervisory board of the company had to be reinforced. And one expression of this paradigm is, of course, the emergence of independent directors. In the 21st century, principle-based models emerged. So there was a shifting wave of thought that not internal but external governance mechanisms are supposed to be superiors in terms of monitoring. At the beginning of the 21st century, there was a broad international consensus in my understanding, among policymakers that shareholder rights have to be increased. And this is what has been done. In particular, activist hedge funds and other active investors were making use of their power. But what I would like to suggest is that not all shareholders, but only a subgroup of them, namely large shareholders, so-called block holders, actually control the company. The big Bureau of Exchange Traded funds and other institutional investors actually support this hypothesis. So let me turn to the empirical part on blockholder anatomy. For a long time, it was assumed that most US public companies were widely held. Nowadays, however, this common understanding has proven wrong in the end. Also, US companies most often have blockholders in their ownership structure. And for this analysis, I use both a historical time dimension and a comparative space dimension. So back in 1931, Berle and Means argued that US modern corporations are subject to separation of ownership and control, meaning that shareholders only have a passive role in the direction of the corporation, and control is largely left to managers. In fact, after World War II, the US stock market was a private matter. 9 out of 10 shares belonged to private individuals, and only few institutions were invested in the US capital markets. Today, households own about 1/3 of the market. That is 3 times less than 75 years ago. And it is interesting to note that until the mid-1980s, the share of pension funds grew significantly, while since the mid-1980s, the share of mutual funds increased significantly. And also international investors and new players such as hedge funds or private equity funds entered the scene. So according to a study by Edmonds and Holderness, about 96% of all listed companies on the US stock exchanges have at least one 5% blockholder, and 12% of these companies have a controlling shareholders. In the United States, large shareholders are often individuals. Another study from 2002 finds that companies listed in UK stock markets are rather widely held, but this does not mean that there are no blockholders in these companies neither. Actually, and in contrast to the United States, the largest shareholders in the United Kingdom are often institutional investors. So it is interesting to understand this difference in international capital markets. On the other hand, in Europe, it has been assumed for a long time that the ownership structure of public and other companies is rather concentrated. But there are also variations within different European countries. For this analysis, I use again both a historical time dimension and a comparative time space dimension. So in their seminal paper, Laporta, Lopez de Silanes, and Schleifer found that relatively few companies in wealthy European economies are widely held, but rather controlled by either families or the state. Also, Bechter and Roll find a high concentration of shareholder power in continental Europe. However, once upon a time, about 50 years ago, large shareholders were mainly governments, insurance corporations, and pension funds, but also banks and non-financial corporations. Today, there are much more foreign investors on European capital markets, in particular investment funds and financial intermediaries, but less so households. Besides this aggregate perspective, viewing individual countries separately is also interesting. In Germany, France, and Italy, for example, there is still a lot of family ownership. In Spain, however, the most predominant ownership category consists of corporate and financial owners, that is basically banks. In Switzerland, and this is what I find in my own study using data of the 50th largest companies on the Swiss stock exchange, on average about 1/3 of the market is held by blockholders. meaning that this is not part of free float, whereas institutional investors from abroad basically dominate. So, all right, let's move on to the economic part of my analysis on blockholder incentives. Key idea here is that blockholders are heterogeneous. The identity of blockholders includes individuals, institutions, and state actors. But this is not the end of the story. Institutional investors themselves are diverse and complex creatures. Because of their increasing importance, I will give a brief overview of the extensive literature on mutual funds, hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, and pension funds. So empirical studies often find a positive correlation between the presence of mutual funds and firm value. At the same time, research has shown that voting behavior of mutual funds is considerably dependent on recommendations issued by proxy advisor. This is a topic for itself, of course, which I will not discuss today. But as regards hedge funds, the evidence is mixed. I think it is fair to say that many studies report positive effects on hedge fund activism on the company. While some studies report positive effects of hedge fund activism, others report negative or no effects on firm value. In private equity and venture capital, most empirical studies find that the presence of hedge funds increases their value. And with regard to sovereign wealth funds, an interesting picture emerges as well. Some studies emphasize that sovereign wealth funds may have positive effects on firm value, at least in the short term, but have negative effects in the long term. Possible interpretation of this might be that sovereign wealth funds are arguably lacking efficiency in monitoring. Speaking of pension funds, the evidence is mixed as well. Pension funds have proved to be most effective in a takeover context in case of a successful campaign, however. So unlike blockholder identity, the characteristics of a blockholder are typically hidden and thus cannot be observed by the company or other market participants. This is important because hidden characteristics are one form of asymmetric information. This is problematic from a regulatory perspective because it would be unclear whether certain legal consequences should kick in or not. And in this regard, I will review the literature on qualified, strategic, activist, and long-term investors very briefly. So many empirical studies suggest that companies with institutional investors that are qualified investors due to their knowledge and experience often have a higher firm value than companies without such investors. But this is not always the case. Other studies reach different conclusions. Studies also find that strategic investors have sometimes a positive effect on firm value of the portfolio company. It may thus be argued that the advantages of strategic investors outweigh their disadvantages. And a large number of empirical studies also investigates the effect of activist actions on firm value. Previous literature, however, finds little or no evidence that shareholder actually generally has a positive impact on company results. According to Edmonds and Holderness, this may be explained as follows. So first, many studies treat all types of shareholders the same way, which shuffles the evidence. Second, there may be a lot of behind-the-scenes activism, which is basically not capturable by the eye of the economist. The evidence on activist hedge funds, however, is more robust. With regard to long-term investors, the evidence is again mixed. Many studies find positive effects of long-term investing, also because it may reduce management myopia. Other studies, however, also find different results. So let's turn over to the legal part on blockholder governance. So in my view, the main problem with corporate law is that shareholder power has been increased considerably within the last few years and decades, but shareholder responsibility has not. And this has led us to a system which is not balanced. So we need additional policies, we need additional rules. And the policies governing corporate law include, for example, shareholder protection and in particular minority protection. And these policies provide, so to say, the glue for answering different questions of corporate law. An instrument which is of particular importance is the principle of equal treatment of shareholders. And this principle is, I think, both elegant and efficient, but it cannot solve the whole problem on its own. What I actually think is that we need to focus on the rules, not on general policies only. More specifically, this is my argument, courts should more often refer to fiduciary duties of large shareholders to solve the hard cases, but also for fine-tuning. The German example, where these doctrines were widely accepted for a couple of decades already, could and should serve an example for other jurisdictions such as Switzerland and maybe also India. Though at the same time, one of the main problems with capital market law is short-termism. The extent to which short-termism is actually a problem has widely and critically been discussed in the US literature, for instance. In my view, however, there is still reason to believe that long-term investing may be beneficial for both an individual company and the economy as a whole. So the policies which drive capital markets behind are investor protection and market protection. These policies guide us when we tackle on capital market problems. An instrument which is particularly important is the principle of equal treatment of market participants and investors. This principle is again elegant and efficient, but it cannot solve the whole problem itself. So in my view, a possible solution to the short-termism problem are loyalty shares. And it is important to know that loyalty shares come in different forms. While some European countries such as France, Italy, Belgium and Spain mostly focus on multiple voting rights, the Swiss proposal recently intends to advance additional financial rights, such as loyalty dividends and certain types of loyalty subscription rights. It is, however, still unclear whether or not this proposal will become law one day. So finally, let me conclude with two hypotheses. Based on my interdisciplinary survey, I've prepared two hypotheses which I would like to put up for discussion in our group. So according to my first hypothesis, general principles of corporate and capital market law are both elegant and efficient instruments for regulating shareholder duties and market conduct. But it has to be more than that. Courts should be open to rely on fiduciary duties of large shareholders in the application of corporate law, both for the hard cases and for fine-tuning. In addition, legislators should regulate loyalty shares in Europe and in Switzerland, maybe also in India, with such regulation allowing freedom of arrangement and prescribing appropriate safeguards. And pursuant to my second hypothesis, corporate and capital market law should step in additionally to guide and support the process of regulating shareholder duties and market conduct in certain areas. From an international and comparative perspective, I identify in particular investor dialogue, corporate voting, board representation, and ownership disclosure as the four remaining loopholes in the regulatory carpet. In the interest of time, I will not further elaborate on this today, but with these two hypotheses in mind, I would like to turn over to the discussion. Thank you very much for your interest and for your attention, and I'm already looking forward to your question and our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Valentin. It was such a wonderful presentation, and we understood the block holders anatomy and the corporate governance, and you are very systematically presented the 20th century, 21st century, the agent-based model. So, very interesting presentation. Now the floor is open for question. We are running shortage of time, but such wonderful presentations are there. Please, you can ask directly, or you can also type the questions.
Can I, Madam, comment with your
Sir,
permission?
please, yes, sir.
First of all, a quite interesting paper with regard to time and space. You started with that. So irrespective of time and space, I don't know, but you're concluding when you go with your both the hypotheses, you are concluding not like the time, but you are concluding in the current space. What I found, like you are not concluding whether you are concluding same thing with the block holders context of taking care of what you said about the loyal shareholders incentive and that. So if you can comment on that.
Thank you very much for your question. I think that is really the critical point of the argument that I would like to make. So I think the main development that I would like to draw, that I try to draw, is that over the last 20 years, there has been a lot of initiatives and efforts from government and policymakers to increase shareholder rights. But there was no discussion at all about increasing shareholder duties at the same time. So what I say, what I observe, and this is mainly focusing on the developments internationally, and different countries come at different speeds, have different focus in their agenda. But over the last 20 years, shareholder rights have been increased so significantly. And this has led to a situation where the whole equilibrium in corporate and capital market law has some kind been disturbing. And that's why I think now is the time, and I make these proposals now because we need some counterbalance that we have to put some responsibility on these actors as well. And I've been looking around and seeing, and of course, trying to observe what other countries have done so far and intend to do. And I think these two solutions are actually a way that could help us to restore that equilibrium in capital and corporate and capital market law now. That's basically the argument I try to make. And I think from an analytical perspective, it helps when you divide this into a time, like in a historical context, and try to develop the argument from that side, but also from a comparative perspective when you try to focus on which countries have done what at what time. And that helps to make the argument, and that's why I've chosen that strategy or that methodology.
But like your argument is more on political economic side, where you want that you can also, you have chosen this party where you should have a faith for at least a long term, and you should have a trust on this political system. But don't you think there is already asymmetric information prevailing between the shareholder perspective, the corporation, the maybe the other side? So why should they abide with the duties? And generally duties, you also know that they are just moral and ethical things, because corporate also does not follow the ethics and moral despite of the corporate governance. They also take some decision which may benefit to them, not ultimately to the shareholder. So it's more moral rather than based on the market efficiency principle. What do you want to say?
Maybe I should say that when I think when I make the argument that shareholders should be responsible, I don't go very far with this idea of a fiduciary duties. I would never say shareholders should have the same type of fiduciary duties than directors or officers have. within a company. I think it's important to distinguish these two concepts very clearly. But the fiduciary duties of shareholders could mean something like they have to be, when they exercise their rights, they have to follow certain constraints, or they're in some way constrained. They cannot, for example, use their right to talk at the general meeting of shareholders without limit. So there are time limits, of course, and corporate law regulates this very clearly. But also with the exercise of other rights, there has been some constraints, also over general principles of law, like the principles of good faith, which does not allow them to sue for action which is not on valid grounds, just to which would eventually lead to an abuse of rights. So this is more the direction I would like to favor. So this is a constraint of rights which shareholders already have, and not a hard new duty to act always in the best interest of the company. This is something I would see very differentiated. And Germany, I have to say, I have not developed so much on this topic, but Germany has experienced very interesting developments exactly in that area in the mid 70s, in the mid 80s, and then in the 95, in the 90s as well. So there has been widely recognized cases in German corporate law which exactly lead to that direction. In some way, even going further, saying that minority shareholders has in certain situation a duty to vote their rights, to exercise their voting rights in a certain way. When a company is almost going bankrupt, and there's only one solution, one very clear solution, which this can be, which you can circumvent this way. So shareholders then have to choose that way and cannot vote in another way. So they have to vote in favor of a restructuring plan if this is the only way to save the company. So this is what the decision from 1995 in Germany, which is widely respected, said. And this is basically the ground that I try to flourish, to make flourish.
Thank you, Wellington. Thank you.
So, Mr. There is a question. Do you think altering the printed contract between shareholders and directors help to improve the relationship? I just merged two questions. There are two questions, but Mr. Sunny, if you can just say what exactly is printed contract, because the laws are different in every country. So if you can just say what exactly is printed contract.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Actually, what I mean that any corporate relation, let it be a shareholder, a director, or the employees of different stature of in the company itself, or even with the market and the company, in which terms and conditions they do, they are all are the printed form of contract, which are their terms and conditions are predefined actually. And what I have seen that majority of the problem between the relation or asymmetric information or adverse selection problem which happens is because the root cause is or these terms and conditions which are printed form which cannot be altered. And this becomes one of the major issue or challenge where this type of to getting rid of their liabilities and exploiting the market for their own benefit can give a rise to this type of problem. So this is what I mean through that by altering this printed form of contract, the terms and conditions which they are, by seeing the problem which both the parties are facing in order to have an efficient outcome, that can help, because there has to be some way, some written form through which a market or any transaction will prevail. This is what I mean.
So, Mr. Valentine, do you have such a law in your country?
No, I'm not 100% sure if I understand. I think we don't. So a printed contract between shareholders and the board of directors. So I think these contracts are mostly not in written. So you get elected at the general meeting, and then you take on your role, but you have certain, like a rule book or like a internal rule book which you have to follow. But I think in most circumstances you don't have a written contract for that actually. But I think you raise an important point. I think the directors have to play an important role here as well as stewards, as representatives of shareholders, also large shareholders. And one policy proposal in this context, which has been made in the US by Babchuk and Hamadani, I think, was that you should elect certain board members which are only which only serve their role for the minority, for example. But you could also think like to have, and of course, one other critical point is here, of course, that major shareholders like blockholders often have their own representatives in the board, and that complicates this taxonomy a lot. And so there are a lot of problems with information sharing, because these people know, of course, what's happening in the board. They know the inside of the companies, and they talk with that to the one shareholder outside. So this person gets additional information. And I think there are no rules on that, basically, except for general principles of law, as the principle of equal treatment of shareholders, which I think is a powerful instrument, but often can solve the whole problem. And you're absolutely right when you say that you should, in this area, maybe come up not just with general principles of the law, but with certain specific rules. And whether this is in a contract between the company and shareholders and the board members, or even within the law, is another question. But I think you raise an important point here, definitely.
Okay, I think we will just last point. Maybe there is a message. We are running shortage of time. Just Indian point of view. Just to respond to your question, I'll just add, because once the article of association and memorandum of association of a company are registered with the register of company, so that creates a relationship between company and the shareholder, company and the outsider. Then coming to shareholders' relation with company, when you go for the public issue or private placement or different kind of debt instruments or bonds, then that particular document creates the relationship between company and the shareholder. If it is a public issue, then your prospectus is there. Then when you enter into the public issue, then the subscribers, they have to fill up this application form. Then company in consultation with the stock exchange and the merchant bankers, company issues the share. So then that relationship also is like a contractual. Another way is your shareholders agreement, share purchase agreement. So investment, then there they also create a relation. That exactly is the contract. But that contract is not between board of director and a shareholder. Board of directors are authorized because they are the alter ego of the company. But there is no such contract between board of director and the shareholder. And shareholders, it may be private equity, if it is private placement, if it is the issuance of preferential share, that is contract only, indirectly contractual relationship. But that contract is between company, because we have the principle of separate legal entity. The board of directors are completely different from the company. So company will be liable or company can sue, but nowhere board of director will be sued. But individually they are responsible. A director who is in charge of the public issue, he or she will be responsible for that. So that the first time the contractual relation starts with article of association. When it is registered, I enter into some kind of relationship with company, then I should go through, I should follow. I cannot say, no, I have not read. Ignorance of reading article memorandum is no excuse. There are so many cases. And doctrine of constructive notice and doctrine of indoor management. So that I think those kind of, till now, I don't think in what context you asked, but I understood your question. So till now, I think there is no scope of such contract between shareholder and director. But in what Mr. Valentin said, the annual general meeting, the shareholders have a very big role because you have to elect the, you have to approve the appointment of directors with special majority 75%. So there, the shareholders only control the company, and otherwise, we do not have such concept in the provisions of the Companies Act. But the contractual relation, what you referred, that actually because the board of directors they work for the company, so those contracts. And when some problem comes, then they take the plea that company, it was a contract between company and shareholder. So that is one issue. Then the question comes whether company will be prosecuted or board of directors will be prosecuted. And only in 138, that dishonor of check, their director will be prosecuted with the company. But many cases, the same issue comes that you have what Mr. Valentin said, that it is a very interesting question, that what contract system we have today and tomorrow what will happen, because this is one issue that we presume this contract is between board of director and shareholder, but exactly those contracts are between company and shareholder unless board of directors are not liable individually. So another is article of association is not a contract, but what I said that because he said that you also report relationship between public and company. So that article and memorandum, they create the relation. Memorandum speaks about the structure of the company. Article speaks about the different rules, procedure of the company. So then that creates the relationship between the public, but exactly that is not contract. But what I understood, this share purchase agreement, shareholder agreement, there are many contracts between the, this company and shareholder, particularly the private equity and preferential share. So that also is, that is not equal to this equity share. That all are very different. What condition you are making for one shareholder may differ from for other. So there are various contractual agreement, but I think we have to think for this. It is very interesting point, and I think we will close the very interesting. We can sit for long time, but because of the time constraint, and there is one session at 7 p.m. So thank you so much. Dr. Valentin, very interesting presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sunny, for this interesting question. So now very quickly, maybe we'll move to the last presentation, and the 7 o'clock plenary session will start. So now I invite the last presenter, Mr. Amit Kumar, to present the paper on Does Indian Corporate Law Talk About Purpose?
So, hello, good evening, everyone. So, ma'am, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, so very good evening to all of you. I'll try to sum up within 20 minutes so that all of you can attend 7 o'clock. It's okay, not an issue, ma'am. Actually, Professor Valentine has done my work easier by introducing the concept of corporate purpose earlier. So my paper my paper talks about that Indian scenario, that where Indian corporate purpose is standing right now. So starting with introduction, that what does the term purpose
You
means?
are from which university?
Ma'am, I'm doing my PhD from Rajiv Gandhi School of Intellectual Property Law, IIT Kharagpur. I'm doing under Professor Indrajit Dubey.
Okay.
So we both have written this paper.
Yes, I saw that. That is why I asked him.
Yes, ma'am. So the basic meaning of the term purpose is that the intention, aim, or function of something or a particular thing which is supposed to be achieved. If you look at the authors who have written on corporate purpose, some of the authors who have written on corporate purpose, like Lucian Bebchuk or Colin Mayer, it has the idea of corporate purpose has been taken up by corporate lawyers, business lawyers, even the students of management and economics. So it has come from all fields, that why it basically answers the question that why a corporation should come into existence in a society. So as Valentine in the last presentation highlighted, that the understanding of corporate purpose has been mainly between the shareholder primacy and the stakeholder model. Apart from these two, there have been certain new mix up of things which has come up basically in United Kingdom, which is very commonly known as enlightened shareholder value model. So I will briefly introduce that what is shareholder primacy. In the shareholder primacy model, most of the corporate law statutes all over the world suggest that the director's duty is to promote the company, to work for the company's affairs. But since mostly from the 1970s or 80 onwards, especially the work of Milton Friedman, in which he highlighted that the only social purpose of the company is to produce profit or to enhance profit for the shareholders. So from that point of time, followed by the principal agent model of the corporation, suggested that it is the shareholders' benefits which needs to be considered as the company's benefit. So from that point of time, the directors aimed their works or the decision making towards enhancing the shareholders' value, whereas the other model suggests that in stakeholder model, which is very much evident or present in the current company law of India, in which section 166, where it says that apart from the company or the shareholders, the directors need to look after the communities, employees, and even their duty has been enhanced to protect environment also. And in case of enlightened shareholders value model, it says that you should look after the stakeholders' interest only to the extent that it is creating value for the shareholders or the value for the company, which has been termed as the long-term value making of the company. So in the recent times, there has been certain development which suggests that there should be a shift from the current understanding of shareholder primacy, because the shareholder primacy has created a lot of inequalities or the kind of externalities that the companies produce. There should be some answers, there should be some compensation or liability which should be framed on the corporations. There has been a constant debate that whether corporations are a public entity or a private entity. So this differentiation has created some sort of a kind of shield to the companies where they pollute environment or violate human rights, but they get away from those things because they believe, because there is an understanding that we can only look after the shareholders, we are not looking after the other entities, and corporate law is not structured in a way that where they can be held answerable to the human rights violation or the environment protection. But this is the business roundtable, which is basically a an organization which includes major companies as Google or Apple, and most of the biggest companies in the United States are part of this. Recently, they have made a change. They have issued a statement on corporate purpose where they have said that since 1997, the earlier statement was in 1997, where they emphatically said that we need to promote the shareholders' interest, whereas in the current last year 2019 they released this statement, and they said that we need to look after the people, environment, human rights, employees. We need to look up. We have not served these constituency properly. So apart from this business roundtable, there have been certain developments in the World Economic Forum, where again this statement came in that why we need to look beyond shareholders. Then this BlackRock is basically one of the largest institutional shareholder, which again issued, which has written its CEO has written a letter to all the a letter to its employees, and he said that why we need to look beyond the shareholders, and we need to look after the environment, and we need to protect supply chains, the kind of atrocities or violation of human rights that takes place in supply chains. And there has been recent legislative proposals by Senator Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. So both of these legislators have proposed that why corporate law or the structure of corporations have failed to protect the employees or the general public as such. It has made the richer more rich and poorer more poor, and there has been a constant shift, a wide shift has been created between the affluent one and the poorer one in the society. So we need to look beyond the current understanding of corporate purpose. If you look at the Indian scenario, earlier Dr. Hitesh was talking about how political economy affects the corporate, how political economy is affecting the corporate structure in any country. If you look at Indian context, then it is basically driven by political economy of that particular time. Prior to independence, it was mainly Indians were making money for the East India companies. But after independence, Pandit Nehru had quite a fascination with the Fabian socialism, which he was very much influenced by the Russian. How the Russian socialism worked, and at that point of time, most of the companies were state-owned companies, and they were mainly kept to lift people out of poverty and all. But if you look at the first corporate law that was enacted in 1956, there was no as such directors' duty. There was not mentioned, or there was no express directors' duty provision in that. So it lacked some sort of what is the purpose of the current, what is the purpose of the corporations in the country. But at that point of time, there were certain cases before the Supreme Court of India in which they highlighted that we need to look beyond shareholders. We need to look after the society, and we need to look beyond shareholder. And especially, they were mainly concerned about the problems of the employees that they were the problems of the employees that were taking place at that point of time. And it was during this time that this National Textiles Union, in which it was at this, the timing at this of this case was basically around when Indira Gandhi was the prime minister, and at that point of time, again, this socialist economic political economy was prevailing in the country. At that point of time, again, Supreme Court highlighted that why we need to move beyond this shareholder primacy model and look after the society and the employees. But if you look at when the major changes that came in corporate law in India was due to one of the biggest scandal that took place in India was the Satyam scam. So when this Satyam scam took place, there was a lot of loss of confidence in the corporate structure. The people were taking out their money from the stock market and all, in order to enhance the reputation of the corporate regulators. Come 2009, they brought out a national voluntary guidelines in which they said that corporations again have a social purpose to look after, and they also brought up a national voluntary guidelines on corporate social responsibility. However, under 2013 Act, there are 4 basic provisions which talks about the analysis of these four aspects, which talks about that where does the corporate purpose of Indian corporate law stays. So first one is directors' duties. If you look at the current 2017, there was a Kotak committee report who said that whether we are running our corporations in a Raja model or a Praja model. So the Raja model suggested that are we running companies for only those people who can afford to invest in a company, or are we running company for the other people also whose activities are being affected, or whose economy or whose well-being is being affected by the company. So if you look at the director's duties, section 162 is very much clear that it asks directors to look after the company, and beyond the interest of company, it looks after the employees, shareholders, community, and protection of environment. So if you look at the current development that has taken place in India, like the diplomat in here recently, the diplomat in India suggested that how corporate law can be used to protect human rights as such in the Human Rights Commission. So he is basically trying to dissolve the public-private divide that has been maintained and which has affected the corporate purpose debate in all over the world. And if you look at the director's duty, it mainly says that there should be stakeholders. The purpose is to serve the stakeholders, but the problem is that there is no enforcement mechanism for that. In India, you can only sue directors through shareholders on behalf of the company. But if you look at the numbers of derivative actions that have come up in India for last like 1956 to 2021, there have been only 78 derivative actions which has been brought before the courts, high courts and supreme courts in India. So there is a dearth of these derivative actions, and apart from there is a possibility to bring those action either through public criticism or oppression or mismanagement or class action suit. But ultimately the problem again lies that these are the mechanisms which are limited to shareholders or the deposit holders. It does not go beyond the company. Like employee cannot sue the directors or the company, or even a third person cannot sue the director or the company. For that, they have to look into the remedy which is available under other laws, non-corporate laws like labor law, or for that matter, environmental laws, or the principles based in tort laws. So corporate law as such, even though it provides that it should serve the stakeholders, but it does not provide any remedy mechanism to the stakeholders. Similarly, it has happened with respect to the corporate social responsibility. When this corporate social responsibility was being mandatory. So in India, there is a concept of mandatory CSR where why you have not spent certain amount of money is supposed to be given. The company is supposed to give a reason for that. So the reasoning given behind this mandatory CSR was that there is a wide gap between India and Bharat. Again, this India and Bharat suggested that how affluent society and the other people who cannot afford or the poor people in the society whose activities are being affected by the companies whether they are being served by the company or not. So the whole idea behind introducing mandatory CSR was that they should serve the society as such. They should give back to the society. But ultimately what has happened that this comply or explain mechanism that has been included to enforce this, the companies are basically giving boilerplate disclosures where they're not explaining why they are not spending particular amount of time and amount of money. And even if they are spending money, the whole definition of under Schedule 7 of CSR is like you cannot spend on companies' activities. So, for example, a company based on natural gas, if it is polluting the environment, and if it spends money on bettering the environment, then it will not count as CSR. But provided if it is harming the environment, but if it opens a college tomorrow, then it will count as CSR. So there is some restrictive or very narrow approach which has been taken under Schedule 7 of the corporate law. And apart from that, there is a need for formulation of policy, and this formulation of policy does not include the stakeholders. And by the term stakeholders, even I'm including employees of the companies. Employees of the company cannot go through corporate law or cannot ask for remedy through corporate law. Again, they have to go through the labor laws to take some remedy, or through the principles of strict liability or absolute liability developed under the tort law. Apart from this has been this was in one of the magazine where they said that yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we have created a lot of value for the shareholders. So apart from shareholders, whether we have served it or not, it was trying to say that companies have merely served the shareholders, but not the stakeholders for whom the company was supposed to come into the society. And one more thing I wanted to highlight is the recent trend where there has been a talk that how corporate law can be used to ensure responsible business, wherein India has also jumped in. Like there has been a rise of ESG reporting. Then this approach of people, planet, and profit approach, which again suggests that India is trying to move towards the stakeholder approach. But ultimately, the enforcement part is again the problem. Here, the reporting mechanism that has been mandated through SEBI, business responsibility and sustainability reporting, these are merely tick box approach that they have brought. It means companies are merely suggesting that yes, we have the policy, yes, we are doing that, but ultimately it is not. There has been, like recently there was a standard mechanism in which there was ranking being done. Most of the Indian companies, including Tata, which is supposed to be the one of the harbinger of corporate purpose, serving the stakeholders, like they were one of the lowest ranked company in the benchmarking alliance which was done. They have a policy, but ultimately they are not looking after their supply chains or the employees involved in the companies. So one of the reasons could be that most of the human rights or the environmental rights are part of the other legislations in India. It has not been, the corporate law has not been structured in a way to be answerable to these demands of the stakeholders. And lastly, I want to make a point that there has been a lot of committees which has been introduced in the 2013 corporate laws, and one of them is Stakeholders Relations Committee. So this nomenclature has been kept as Stakeholders Relation Committee, but ultimately it is basically a Shareholders Relations Committee, because only shareholders or deposit holders can bring their grievances to this committee. Stakeholders cannot bring, apart from shareholders or deposit holders, cannot bring their grievances to the before the board or the company. So to conclude, I would like to say that on paper, corporate law has made a significant departure to set the corporate purpose right, but ultimately it lacks the proper enforcement, be it directors' duties, be it CSR mechanism, be it responsible business mechanism. So there needs to be some sort of enforcement mechanism through corporate law which can be developed, or the recent development in mostly in European jurisdiction of human rights due diligence legislations, where human rights due diligence or the environment due diligence legislation, where they are saying that where they are saying that how victims can come over and look for remedies within corporate law. Apart from that, the stakeholders role, there has been a tendency to think that since shareholders invest a lot of money, they are the only risk bearers in the company. But if you look at the employees or the other stakeholders involved in it, they are equally important to the success of the company. So in the end, I would like to say that yes, on paper, India has made a significant departure from shareholder model to stakeholder model, but ultimately the enforcement mechanism is lacking. Thank you.
Okay, as already Hitesh sir has sent on message, the next session will start. But Mr. Amit, I have so many questions in your presentation. Maybe in future through email, I don't have your email, I can exchange. But one thing, just very quickly, 1 minute, while thanking all the presenters, just I few points that I do not know this employees thing you are bringing again and again. But many cases the court also has said because they have a different forum. and specific law is there. Why you are interested to bring employees in the purview of Companies Act? I didn't understand, but we will discuss maybe if quickly you can say, and we'll close the session because all are waiting.
Ma'am, can I make a small point like regarding this employee representation? If you look at this, be it labor law, environment law, why I said that employees should be a part of this corporate law. Most of them are like once something happens, then only these laws comes into existence. These are not preventative or a preventive mechanism. If you include employee within the corporate law mechanism, the director's decision making changes over there. And if you don't include them, then ultimately once the violation has occurred, and for companies it is not a matter of like they can pay any amount of money to get over all these violations. Money is not a problem for the companies, like it does not cost them much, and even reputation harms and all can be done away with like after a certain point of time. But then again, how to prevent those happenings, that is where this inclusion of employees representation or the human rights mechanism, that currently this debate has been happening, that how corporate purpose can help it in. Basically I'm working on this area in my PhD, that how business can respect human rights through corporate purpose debate. So this is my PhD topic basically. So I can I can message you, ma'am, if you
Again
I
it
can
will
mail you.
remain as a question. I have a long answer for your issue. We'll discuss in future. I think we are running
Sure, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I think I don't want to take more time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
So should we close the meeting?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mamata and Dr. Hitesh, for your insightful inputs for all the presenters, and I congratulate all the 6 presenters for wonderful presentation. I wish you develop your research even more, in a better manner after getting the inputs from the chair and the co-chair. Thank you so much.
Very interesting papers.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and our special presenter, Mr. Valentine. In a odd time, you are presenting in our conference. Thank you. All the papers were very interesting.
Thank you so much. I request all of you to
Mr.
join for the
paper,
next
but I
session.
have a chat with him. I have many points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. I request everyone to join for the next plenary talk. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.